On April 6, 2009, near Bridgend in South Wales, a lorry driver pulled over on the side of the M4. Just a few meters away, at the bottom of a small ravine, he spotted an old suitcase, half hidden among the tall grass. The odd placement and shape of the bag sparked his suspicion. When he unzipped it, he was horrified to see a human hand inside. Stunned, he immediately alerted the police. Within hours, police confirmed that the suitcase contained the body of Kirsty Grabham, 24, a young woman who had recently been reported missing. But how did she end up there? Kirsty was born in England on June 19, 1984. Her parents, David and Catherine, had 3 daughters, Kirsty, Sonia, and Haley. Kirsty was particularly close to her mother. At 14, Kirsty's family moved to Bridgend, South Wales. The move brings many challenges: new schools, new friends, and the hardships of adolescence. But Kirsty still stands out with her striking looks and confidence. Inspired by celebrities in glossy magazines, she dreamed of becoming a model, picturing herself on catwalks and in photo shoots. The reality, however, was far harsher. The modeling world was brutally competitive, and Kirsty never quite broke through. She managed a few amateur shoots, but they brought in little money. Determined to stay independent, she worked various jobs, as a waitress, a cashier, and even cleaning houses, refusing to depend on her parents. By 17, financial difficulties pushed her into nightlife and adult entertainment-related work. For Kirsty, it wasn't a glamorous choice, but a necessity. Ashamed and fearful of judgment, she hid this side of her life from her family. To them, she claimed she worked as an administrator at a local company. For clients, she used the pseudonym Megan to keep her 2 worlds separate. Although the job gave her her own apartment and financial stability, it brought no pride, only constant fear, shame, and inner conflict. She longed for a day when she could start fresh. Despite her secret, Kirsty remained close to her family. To her parents, she appeared responsible and ambitious. They never suspected the truth about her work. Somewhere else, Paul Grabham, born in 1983 in South Wales, had grown up in a very different environment. His childhood was scarred by poverty and constant conflict at home. His parents often argued, neglecting him and leaving him feeling unwanted. From a young age, Paul displayed aggression, clashing with teachers, fighting with classmates, skipping school, and earning poor grades. Attempts by his parents to discipline him failed. By his teenage years, he was known for fights, rudeness, open defiance. He soon dropped out of school, leaving without qualifications. Around that time, Paul turned to banned substance. What began with softer substances quickly escalated into heavier use. His addiction fueled both his aggression and his isolation. At 18, he began working as a male escort to fund his habits, serving both men and women. This work became his main income, but brought with it humiliation, anger, and exposure to the criminal underworld, dragging him deeper into destructive behavior. His aggression often spilled into daily life. In one incident, he accused a neighbor of damaging his car, then threatened and physically attacked her until she moved away. Such outbursts were not unusual, and many people in his circle tried to avoid him. By 2004, Paul's life was chaotic, defined by substance abuse, escort work, and uncontrollable violence. His manipulative behavior left scars on those around him. Kirsty met Paul at a nightclub in Bridgend in 2004. She was 20, he was 21. Both were at crossroads in their lives. Kirsty was hiding the truth about her job from her family, and Paul was struggling with banned substance and drifting between odd jobs. Introduced through mutual friends, they felt an instant spark. Kirsty was attracted to his confidence, while Paul was drawn to her beauty and bright smile. They spent the evening together, but the relationship did not develop beyond light flirtation. Afterward, they occasionally kept in touch, but nothing serious followed. For Kirsty, it was just a fleeting episode, never something she thought would shape her future. Everything changed in late 2007. 3 years after their first meeting, Paul unexpectedly walked into the establishment where Kirsty worked. At that time, she was still going by Megan. He recognized her instantly and approached to talk. The encounter was awkward at first, but the conversation soon turned warm and familiar. Paul admitted he had often thought of her and suggested they meet outside of work. From that moment on, their relationship accelerated rapidly. They began seeing each other more often, going for walks and sharing personal stories. For Kirsty, who had hidden the truth about her life for years, Paul seemed like someone who accepted her without judgment. Playing the role of a confident and charming man, Paul concealed his darker side. Kirsty believed he was her prince, the one who would rescue her from her current life. His talk of wanting to leave his own troubled past behind and start a family inspired her. Paul skillfully played on her hopes, embellishing his history to win her trust. In reality, he saw Kirsty not only as a woman, but also as a potential source of income. Blinded by hope, she trusted him completely. In December 2007, just weeks after reconnecting, Kirsty stunned her mother with the news that she and Paul had decided to get married. According to Kirsty, he had proposed, and she accepted without hesitation. The announcement was a complete surprise to her family, who hadn't even known she had a boyfriend. Kirsty's mother, Catherine, was immediately alarmed. She urged her daughter to postpone the wedding, but Kirsty was determined. The ceremony was set for only 5 weeks away. When Kirsty finally brought Paul home, her parents' concerns deepened. He made a dreadful impression, unkempt, poorly dressed, and openly rude to them. His stories about his past sounded implausible. David and Catherine Broomfield told Kirsty bluntly that he seemed unreliable and that she was making a mistake, but she refused to listen. Her older sister, Sonia, also voiced her concerns, yet Kirsty ignored the warnings. To her, Paul represented her only chance at happiness. Since childhood, she had dreamed of a beautiful wedding dress, a big family, and a cozy home. Compared to that dream, her current life felt unbearably empty. The wedding took place in February 2008. Her parents and sisters attended, but their smiles were forced while Paul radiated pride. For Kirsty, it felt like a dream come true. For her family, it marked the beginning of the end. After the wedding, Kirsty and Paul moved into Kirsty's flat in Bridgeton. And then the nightmare began. Paul immediately took control. He taking her bank cards under the pretense of managing their finances. He refused to work, spending his days lounging at home while Kirsty supported them both. Worst of all, he not only allowed her to continue working as an escort, but pressured her to take on more clients. Soon he began accompanying her to work, supposedly for her safety, but in truth to monitor her every move. He even created profiles for her on dating sites to advertise her services. Kirsty now worked not only at the club but also from home. She hated this life. She longed to quit her job, have children, and become an ordinary wife. But Paul kept her under constant pressure, manipulating her emotions. He convinced her that she was nothing without him. He turned her life into hell, checking her phone, forbidding her from seeing friends, and relentlessly criticizing her appearance. Gradually, Kirsty became completely isolated. A few months later, Paul struck her for the first time, then again, and again. Kirsty tried to cope by writing in a diary, but she no longer had the strength to resist. Her life was no longer her own. One evening, furious that Kirsty hadn't earned enough, Paul started a fight. It began with shouting and pushing, then escalated into a blow. The shock left Kirsty stunned. Paul quickly apologized, swearing it would never happen again. But his apologies were empty. Soon, the violence became routine, each episode more forceful than the last. Aggression was his tool of control. Whenever Kirsty hesitated or refused his demands, threats came first, followed by violence. Once, when she suggested quitting her job, Paul cut her off with insults and struck her again. After that, he tightened his grip even further, making every decision for her, and forbidding her even to imagine living independently, Catherine began to notice that her daughter was deeply unhappy. She tried several times to have a heart-to-heart conversation, but Kirsty either avoided the subject or brushed it aside. Convinced that something was seriously wrong, Catherine warned her outright that this man would destroy her. But in her diary, Kirsty dismissed those concerns. She admitted to herself that the marriage was toxic, yet she didn't dare leave. Fear of the unknown, feelings of guilt, and psychological dependence kept her trapped. She clung to the faint hope that things might one day improve. On March 28, 2009, Kirsty and Paul went to a club in Swansea with friends. Drinking and banned substance use were routine for them. Witnesses later recalled tension between the couple. Paul appeared irritable, while Kirsty seemed to tread carefully, trying to avoid provoking him. Around midnight, an argument broke out. Paul stormed off alone, leaving Kirsty behind. She chose to stay, unwilling to risk traveling with him in his agitated state. Her friends noticed she looked exhausted and downcast, though she tried to hide it. Late that night, she called a taxi. The driver dropped her off at her home and watched as she walked confidently inside. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The following morning, Paul told Catherine that Kirsty had left early, taking some belongings and money. He claimed he had overslept and noticed nothing. He even hinted that she might have run away with another man. But Catherine's suspicions were immediate. Kirsty had left behind her bank cards and most of her possessions, an unlikely choice for someone planning to start a new life. Soon it emerged that, on the night she vanished, Kirsty had attempted to call emergency services, but the line was cut off. Likely due to poor reception, neighbors later admitted they had heard muffled screams, the sounds of a struggle, and noises as if something heavy was being dragged. None of them called the police, assuming it was just another domestic row. When Kirsty was officially reported missing, police quickly turned their attention to Paul. His version of events did not match the evidence. He insisted she had left voluntarily, yet her belongings remained in the flat. Investigators also discovered freshly painted patches on the walls, as though something had been covered up. Even more suspicious, the living room carpet was missing. Paul claimed Kirsty had wanted to redecorate, an excuse that sounded absurd. On April 6, 2009, the investigation took a grim turn. A lorry driver pulled over on the M4 near Bridgend and spotted an old suitcase in a ditch. Curious, he opened it and recoiled in horror. Inside lay a human hand. He immediately called the police. Officers arrived and confirmed the shocking truth. The suitcase contained the body of a woman. The autopsy identified her as Kirsty Grabham. The examination revealed brutal details: a broken nose and jaw, extensive bruises and scratches. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. Kirsty had been struck multiple times and showed clear signs of attempted strangulation. It was also evident that her body had been stored elsewhere before being dumped in the ditch. That same day, Paul was arrested. During questioning, he denied involvement, insisting he knew nothing and that Kirsty had left of her own accord. His evasive behavior only fueled police suspicions. Investigators soon uncovered a disturbing detail. The very next day after Kirsty disappeared, Paul had withdrawn money from her account and visited a massage parlor. Reconstructing the night of the murder, police concluded that an argument had erupted between Paul and Kirsty. In a fit of rage, he beat and strangled her until she was dead. He then dragged her body into the living room and tried to force it into a suitcase. When it didn't fit, he even considered dismembering her but lacked the tools. Eventually, he managed to cram the body inside, drove to the roadside, and abandoned it. Blood traces were later found in the house. Despite his clumsy attempts to clean them, fresh paint on the ceiling was splattered with concealed blood, and the missing carpet had almost certainly been discarded because it was saturated beyond saving. Kirsty's diary also became a crucial piece of evidence. In its pages, she described her fear of Paul and her desperate dreams of escaping him. In early 2010, Paul Grabham finally stood trial. Prosecutors laid out overwhelming evidence: the recording of Kirsty's desperate but failed 911 call, testimony from neighbors who heard her screams, and the violent struggle the suspicious withdrawals from her bank card after her death, and the diary entries themselves. When those entries were read aloud in court, many in the room wept. Paul, however, refused to admit the truth. He clung to his lies, insisting that Kirsty had left on her own and that someone else was responsible. But the jury wasn't fooled. On February 4, 2010, Paul Grabham was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. With a minimum of 19 years before parole, the judge condemned the sheer brutality of the crime and Paul's chilling lack of remorse. For Kirsty's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but no true relief from their grief. For them, this was more than just the conviction of a murderer. It was a cruel reminder of how a toxic relationship can destroy lives. Catherine, Kirsty's mother, never forgave herself for not being able to protect her daughter. Her instincts had warned her about the dangers of the relationship, but Kirsty hadn't listened. That thought haunted her endlessly, deepening her sorrow. Kirsty's father, David, withdrew into silence, unable to speak about the tragedy. Losing their youngest daughter fractured the once strong family they had been. Kirsty's older sister, Haley, was shattered. She and Kirsty had always been close, and the emptiness left behind was unbearable. Struggling with depression and hopelessness, Haley turned to alcohol in a desperate attempt to dull the pain. Just 5 years after Kirsty's murder, she died from alcohol poisoning at the age of 31. The family was forced to bury a second daughter. For Sonia, another sister, the realization came too late. How vital it is to fight for those you love while you still can. She tried to support her grieving parents, but she, too, carried the crushing weight of loss. The Kirsty's family was left scarred in ways no verdict could ever mend. 2 daughters gone, a family torn apart, and a pain that would never truly heal. Emily Jean Schwartz and her husband were celebrating their first wedding anniversary with a romantic getaway. They traveled in their converted camper van, a symbol of their shared dreams and hopes for the future. Emily, a vibrant 22-year-old with a captivating voice and personality, seemed to be living a dream. She was married to the man she loved and building a life on the road with him. Her future was bright, filled with aspirations of becoming a cosmetologist, making others feel beautiful, and exploring the world with her husband, Joseph Anthony Ferlazzo. This love story appeared ideal at first, but it quickly turned into a tragedy that deceived nearly everyone, even Emily, until it was too late. On Monday, October 18, 2021, at around 6:00 p.m., 41-year-old Joseph Ferlazzo, a tattoo artist, arrived back in Northfield, New Hampshire, alone. He claimed he had just finished a romantic anniversary trip to Vermont with his 22-year-old wife, Emily Jean Schwartz. But Emily was missing. Joseph told his in-laws a story that immediately raised suspicion. He claimed that he and Emily had a heated argument in a parking lot near Bolton, Vermont. According to Joseph, Emily had stormed off, declaring she was taking an Uber back to New Hampshire. He said he waited and searched for her, but she never returned. Emily's mother, Adrienne Bass, and stepfather, David Bass, instantly knew something was terribly wrong. The weekend before the trip, Adrienne had been overcome by a feeling of impending danger, a mother's intuition that her daughter was not safe. 3 days later, on the 19th of October, 2021, shortly after midnight, a phone call from Joseph's friend, Spencer Lemons, exposed the horrifying truth about what really happened during that supposed romantic getaway. Emily Jean Schwartz was born on July 25, 1999, in Plymouth, New Hampshire. Her birth brought great happiness to Adrienne. Emily was a bright and cheerful child who loved anything sparkly and beautiful. Reflecting her own personality, she grew up surrounded by love. Her mother, Adrienne, was someone she trusted completely and always felt safe with. Her stepfather, David Bass, loved her very much, and together with her brothers, They created a loving and supportive family. Emily was a beautiful and talented aspiring singer with big dreams. People who knew her, like her stepmother, Prudy Schwartz, believed she had the it factor because of her captivating personality and unique voice. Prudy remembers, "She was the girl that ran around in polka dot pants and a striped shirt dancing. She was always very happy. She absolutely loved to sing, and she was good at it." Emily seemed destined for success, perhaps even on a show like American Idol. Emily attended schools in Hopkinton and Orford before graduating from Concord High School. During her school years, she participated in cross-country and track and field, always pushing herself to grow and improve. After graduation, she earned her licensed nursing assistant certification and began working as a caregiver, finding deep fulfillment in helping others. But Emily's ultimate ambition was to become a cosmetologist. She dreamt of helping people feel good about themselves, something she herself sometimes struggled with. Even when facing her own insecurities, Emily was determined to help others feel beautiful. Emily found happiness in simple things: shopping, turtles, her cat Oreo, and her dog Remy. She enjoyed spending time with her best friend Lauren, especially during the summer with bikinis and trips to Hampton Beach. Emily also loved adventures with her family, like camping, visiting Acadia National Park, hiking, and rock climbing. When she had free time, she liked dressing up and volunteering at the New Hampshire Renaissance Fair. Ava, in her darkest moments, her hope and determination to survive shone brightly. She always persevered and fought for what was right. In 2020, Emily's life took what seemed like a romantic turn. She married Joseph Anthony Ferlazzo, a tattoo artist 19 years her senior. They purchased a converted bus that became both their home and their means to travel, living on Emily's parents' property in New Hampshire. The actual experience was very different from the exciting and romantic adventure they had imagined. What looked like a perfect love story between Emily and a charming tattoo artist was actually something much darker. Emily's family felt something was wrong from the start. "They didn't like him from our first meeting," said Emily's stepmother. She said there was something about his eyes. He looked evil. Sadly, the family's fears proved to be true. The family suspected Joseph was abusing Emily. Emily would try to get help, but going back to him made things worse. Adrian explained that Emily was caught in a common cycle of domestic violence, seeking help, returning to her abuser, and then suffering more severe consequences for trying to escape. It was a cycle Emily couldn't break, and it was destroying her. Adrian told the police that her daughter had been a victim of domestic violence before. There were signs, like bruises and injuries on Emily's body, that her family had noticed before the trip. However, like many abuse victims, Emily probably downplayed the danger she was in. Adrian didn't approve of the relationship and felt her daughter wasn't safe. She recalled a lunch with them at a restaurant where she became overwhelmed with a feeling of danger from Joseph. Though she couldn't explain his specific actions or demeanor, Adrian felt this was a mother's intuition, warning her of the danger Emily was in. However, Emily, like many victims of domestic violence, it couldn't or wouldn't recognize the full extent of the threat. On Friday, October 15, 2021, Emily and Joseph began a trip to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. They hoped for a romantic getaway. They lived in a converted Chevrolet Express bus, which they used as both their home and transportation, parked on Emily's parents' property in Northfield, New Hampshire. The day started well as they drove the bus. Emily even sent her family videos of the beautiful fall scenery during their 2-hour drive to Bolton, Vermont. Bolton, a charming rural town at the foot of Vermont's Green Mountains, it seemed ideal for a romantic anniversary trip. It was located 30 miles east of Burlington, close to Lake Champlain. They had reserved an Airbnb with campervan parking for the weekend. Joseph's sister and her boyfriend had booked another Airbnb nearby, turning it into a family celebration. On the surface, everything looked perfect. A young couple enjoying their anniversary amidst Vermont's stunning fall colors, with family close by. However, hidden beneath this beautiful scene, danger was looming. According to Joseph's later confession to police, he and Emily arrived in Bolton between 7 and 8 o'clock p.m. On Friday evening, they spent their first night in their converted bus peacefully. Saturday, the 16th of October, 2021, would be their actual anniversary date. What should have been a day of joy and celebration. But Saturday morning would bring horror instead. Joseph and Emily reportedly began arguing during the evening of the 15th of October, and tensions escalated throughout the night. According to the police report, Joseph told detectives that he and his wife argued in their camper on Saturday morning. He said she punched and kicked him during the argument, especially in the groin. However, the police believe Joseph's actions went beyond self-defense. Emily went to lie down. Instead of leaving her alone, walking away, or getting help, Joseph made a deliberate choice that resulted in Emily's death. Joseph confessed that after Emily lay down, he waited 5 to 10 minutes. Then, he got his Glock 19 pistol, attacked her, and shot her twice while she was lying down, unable to defend herself. Forensic evidence showed the extent of the violence. Emily was shot twice in the head, and investigators determined that Joseph used a red throw pillow, probably to make the gunshots quieter. A bullet found inside the camper had fabric stuck to it, which is thought to be from the red throw pillow. Emily dreamed of helping others feel beautiful, who loved to sing and wanted to travel the world, was dead at 22 years old, killed by the man who had promised to love and protect her on what should have been one of the happiest days of their lives. Joseph's nightmare had only just begun. In an act of shocking cruelty that would disturb even experienced detectives, Joseph put a trash bag over Emily's head and hauled her body into the small bathroom of their RV. Afterward, he acted as if everything were normal. He got ready to have breakfast with his sister and her boyfriend. He sat with them, made small talk, and pretended to be a caring husband whose wife was just asleep. His sister and her boyfriend had no clue that Emily's body was in garbage bags only a few miles away. After breakfast, between 12 and 15 hours after the shooting, he dismembered Emily's body with a handsaw from behind the driver's seat. He meticulously cut off her feet, legs, arms, and head, placing each body part into separate black plastic garbage bags. These acts were so disturbing, they would haunt investigators for years. The medical examiner found that Emily had been stabbed 18 times after her death. These post-mortem wounds indicated extreme rage, contradicting Joseph's claim of self-defense. Inside the camper van, which was the scene of the crime, investigators found Emily's blood-covered engagement ring in a cup holder. A knife with blood stains was also found in a butcher's block. The camper van, once a symbol of their dreams, freedom, and love, had become Emily's final resting place. Throughout the entire process, Joseph showed no emotion, remorse, or understanding of the seriousness of his actions. He treated the woman he once loved as if she were worthless trash, systematically getting rid of her body. After committing this unspeakable act, Joseph began an elaborate and calculated charade designed to cover his tracks, with Emily's dismembered remains sealed in 8 black plastic garbage bags in the bathroom of their camper. Joseph drove the vehicle to a friend's property on Meadowbrook Lane in St. Albans, Vermont, where it would remain hidden while he concocted his lies. Joseph did more than just hide Emily's body. For 3 days, from the 16th of October to 18th, 2021, he deliberately tried to mislead people. He sent many texts and made several calls to Emily's phone. This created the false impression that he was desperately looking for his missing wife. His actions were thorough, but also completely wrong. More chilling still were the increasingly frantic messages he sent. These texts were part of an elaborate performance designed to create the illusion that Emily had indeed stormed off after an argument and was now refusing to communicate with her husband. Joseph was literally texting a corpse, pretending to search for a woman he had brutally murdered just days before. Cell phone records for Joseph would later show that his movements during this period matched exactly what he reported to investigators during his interview. He had been meticulous in creating a timeline that supported his fabricated story. Meanwhile, Joseph prepared for his return to New Hampshire, crafting a story he believed would deflect suspicion from himself. On Monday, October 18, 2021, at approximately 6:00 p.m., Joseph returned alone to Emily's family home in Northfield, New Hampshire. He was visibly shaking and appeared distressed. Emily's mother, Adrienne, immediately noticed something was amiss. Initially, she attributed his shivering to the cold from riding his motorcycle from Vermont to New Hampshire. However, a deeper intuition A mother's instinct screamed danger. Joseph told Emily's parents a story he had practiced. He said that on Saturday, he and Emily argued intensely in a parking lot in Bolton. He claimed that as Emily tried to leave, the argument worsened, and he stopped her. He said she kicked him in the groin. Joseph stated that he then went to a nearby store. When he came back, Emily told him she was taking an Uber back to New Hampshire. Joseph said this was the last he heard from her. He claimed he waited, looked for her, and tried to contact her, but she didn't respond. Finally, he said he gave up and went home alone, thinking Emily would be there. Emily's parents didn't believe Joseph's story. Adrian told police that Emily had been a victim of domestic violence. She had seen scratches and bruises on Emily and knew of several past physical fights between her and Joseph. Adrian also said she had a strong feeling the weekend before Emily went to Vermont that her daughter was in danger. Emily's stepfather, David Bass, confirmed Adrian's account. That same Monday evening, Emily's parents contacted the Vermont State Police to report Emily missing. They immediately suspected something terrible had happened and didn't wait to see if she would return on her own. The Vermont State Police asked the public for assistance in locating Emily and Joseph. As Joseph was a person of interest in Emily's disappearance, detectives also started searching for the couple's camper van, which Joseph said Emily had abandoned when she allegedly took an Uber. The police found the camper van at a property in Sainted Grading, Albans. However, Joseph had already gone back to New Hampshire by that time. Law enforcement began watching the camper van while also trying to find Joseph to question him about his wife's location. Unbeknownst to them, Emily's dismembered body was sitting in garbage bags inside the very camper they were watching. Joseph had been so confident in his cover-up that he had simply left the evidence behind, believing his story about Emily's disappearance would be accepted without question. As the investigation intensified and police closed in, Joseph became increasingly desperate. He tried to get his friend Spencer Lemons to drive him back to Vermont, presumably to retrieve or better hide the evidence of his crime. But it was during this desperate attempt to return to the scene that Joseph's carefully constructed web of lies would finally unravel. Just past midnight on October 19, 2021, Spencer Lemons made a phone call that would change everything. Spencer was a friend of Joseph's who had agreed to give him a ride. According to an affidavit, Spencer had been driving Joseph toward the camper van when he noticed state troopers watching the vehicle. When Spencer asked why police were there, Joseph's response was chilling. Spencer told the authorities that Joseph had confided in him and confessed to murdering Emily. Not only that, he had also informed him about the location of her remains. Spencer immediately kicked Joseph out of his car and called 911. After finding Emily's body in the camper, police located Joseph Ferlazzo in Santiago, Albans, Vermont. A detective sergeant found him at a gas station and brought him to the state police barracks in St. Albans. There, Joseph confessed to murdering his wife, Emily. Even in his confession, Joseph Ferlazzo attempted to present himself as the victim. He told police that he and Emily had argued on Saturday, and she had been hitting and kicking him. In his videotaped confession, Joseph Ferlazzo said that as soon as he put the vehicle in park, his wife went completely berserk, like psychotic, and he shot her. However, investigators soon found inconsistencies in Joseph's account. He stated that Emily had been drinking alcohol the night of the murder, but toxicology reports showed no alcohol in her system. He also claimed she was attacking him, but the forensic evidence contradicted this. Joseph confessed to police that after breakfast, he moved the camper to a different location. He then dismembered Emily's body. He placed each body part into a separate garbage bag. When police searched the camper, they discovered Emily's dismembered remains in 8 black plastic garbage bags in the bathroom, exactly as Joseph had described. They also found the Glock 19 pistol and the handsaw used in the crime. The investigation into the case revealed a troubling pattern. This wasn't the first violent death in Joseph Ferlazzo's family. In October 2009, his stepmother was stabbed to death at her Pennsylvania home. His father was questioned, but the case remains unsolved. Forensic examination revealed the true extent of the violence Emily had endured. The former medical examiner told the jury that Emily was shot twice in the head and stabbed 18 times after she was dead. This wasn't self-defense or a crime of passion. This was an act of pure rage and hatred. The investigation also uncovered Joseph's attempts to create an alibi. Following Emily's death, her husband sent numerous text messages and made several phone calls over the course of 3 days. Beginning on October 16, 2021, in an attempt to cover up his crime, as if he were looking for her, in January 2023, he was also ordered to pay Emily's family $5 million in a civil wrongful death lawsuit. Joseph Ferlazzo pleaded not guilty to the charges against him and decided to take the matter to court. Despite his detailed confession to police, Joseph maintained his innocence and claimed self-defense. The trial began in December 2024, nearly 3 years after Emily's murder. During the proceedings, Joseph took the stand in his own defense, claiming that Emily had threatened him and that he feared for his life. But Chittenden County State's Attorney Sarah George said the jury did not believe his claim and were unable to reconcile his statements with the evidence presented during the trial. After hearing the testimony, it took the jury less than 2 hours to reach a guilty verdict. On the 13th of December, 2024, Joseph Ferlazzo was found guilty of first-degree murder. On the 24th of April, 2025, Joseph Ferlazzo appeared in court for sentencing. Vermont's Superior Court judge sentenced Joseph Ferlazzo to 42.5 years in prison, calling the circumstances of the crime extremely aggravated. Emily Jean Schwartz was more than just a victim of domestic violence. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer who wanted to make the world more beautiful. Her best friend, Lauren, honored Emily's memory during the sentencing hearing by playing a song she had written after Emily's murder. The courtroom heard not just about the horror of Emily's death, but also about the joy, laughter, and love she had brought to everyone who knew her. As she was taken from this world too soon by domestic violence, the family is requesting that, in lieu of flowers and cards, donations be made online to the New Hampshire Coalition Against Domestic Violence in her memory. Emily's family has worked tirelessly to ensure that her story raises awareness about domestic violence. They want other young women to recognize the warning signs that Emily may have missed or minimized. Don't feel like you have to keep going back to your abuser thinking you can change them or that things are going to get better. This is the message Emily's loved ones want to share, that no one deserves to live in fear and help is always available. The desire for family and love can sometimes lead to tragedy. For Alexandria, a 21-year-old Ole Miss student, her dreams of a happy future ended on a dark night at Lake Sardis. Although a party was happening at a nearby bar, Alexandria was eager to go home. Her friends wanted her to stay, but she insisted on leaving. Outside, she quickly texted Summony. She took a taxi home, unaware of the danger that awaited her. This story is a warning for young people who still need to learn how to handle their own problems. Parents should teach their children that they can always rely on their parents for support, no matter what. Alexandria Costiel, known as Allie to her family and friends, was born to Cindy Costiel and Keith Costiel on September 11, 1997. She and her younger brother, Andrew, were raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Even as a child, Alexandria was optimistic and full of love and joy. She treated everyone, even slangers, with kindness and warmth, just as she did her own family. Alexandria had a knack for lifting people's spirits with her presence and genuine smile. Her friends always said she was a constant source of light. Alexandria was a wonderful daughter, sister, and friend. She excelled as an athlete and student. From 2012 to 2016, she participated in track and field, golf, youth government, and the National Honor Society. She successfully balanced her academics, sports, extracurriculars. During school breaks, Alexandria enjoyed yoga, running half marathons. She also volunteered in Peru and Africa, teaching English to children. Don't be afraid to be who you are was the core principle that Alexandria lived by and encouraged others to follow. She accepted people with all their character traits, was an incredibly loyal friend, and wasn't afraid to show her true nature. It was for all these qualities that people loved her. They simply felt comfortable around her. After high school, Alexandria enrolled at the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss, in Oxford. Her lifelong dream came true. She appreciated the college's traditions, was fond of the distinguished professors, enjoyed the overall atmosphere, and loved the presence of a major football team. Alexandria started at Ole Miss in the fall of 2016. She hoped to do more than just earn a business and marketing degree. In addition to her studies, Alexandria joined the Alpha Kappa Psi Women's Club and the business community. She also founded and led a golf club, taught yoga and Pilates in her spare time. Although her schedule was packed, her studies remained her priority. Alexandria wanted a boyfriend, something she didn't have in high school. Like many students starting college, she hoped to find a life partner. In high school, she had crushes, but nothing ever became serious. Alexandria's dream of having a boyfriend finally came true with Brandon Thiesfeld, a freshman classmate from Fort Worth, Texas. She was immediately smitten, and they spent much of their freshman year at Ole Miss together. She often invited him to her sorority's parties. Despite spending a lot of time together, and others assuming they were a couple, Alexandria and Brandon never officially defined their relationship as boyfriend and girlfriend. They didn't go on formal dates or discuss their future. At times, Brandon would even block Alexandria's number for weeks or months. Alexandria and Brandon had very different perspectives on their relationship. Alexandria was attracted to Brandon from the start and thought he felt the same way. She wanted a deeper connection than friendship and hoped he would eventually want a serious, committed relationship with her. She envisioned them becoming a couple of John, graduating together, and ultimately getting married. However, Brandon saw his relationship with Alexandria as casual and intimate, but nothing serious. He was a player, seeing multiple women at once and leading each to believe they had a future together. He didn't want a committed relationship and manipulated Alexandria to fulfill his physical needs. Knowing she liked him, he would brush off any expectations of commitment by claiming he wasn't good enough for her. Their relationship was turbulent. Brandon remained distant. He never visited Alexandria's home and knew few of her friends. In fact, some of Alexandria's friends didn't even know Brandon's last name. Alexandria didn't confide much in her friends about the relationship, so they only knew what little she chose to share. Alexandria used to tell her mother, Cindy, everything. Although Alexandria still talked to her mother, she never mentioned her relationship with Brandon directly. Cindy knew Alexandria had a crush on someone from her classes. People in love often see things differently, and Alexandria likely didn't realize Brandon was manipulating her. She only saw his good qualities, viewing their relationship optimistically. This wasn't because she was naive, but because she was only 19. She was living away from her parents for the first time and enjoying the attention from a boy she liked. In the summer of 2019, Alexandria, age 21, was preparing for her final year of college. She spent the summer on campus, taking classes, joining activities, and socializing. In early July, her parents visited, and Alexandria was thrilled. They helped her set up her off-campus apartment, went shopping, cooked meals together, and enjoyed each other's company. Alexandria missed them so much, she asked them to stay longer, but they had to return to St. Louis. Her mother, Cindy, I remember that saying goodbye that time was unusually hard. After their visit, Alexandria still frequently called her parents to talk and share updates. On July 19, 2019, at approximately 7:00 p.m., Alexandria called home. She had been sleeping because she had stayed up late, studying for an important test the next day. Alexandria told her mother she was going to a bar with friends later that night. It was a normal conversation, and Cindy had no idea it would be their last. In a few hours, their lives would be irrevocably changed by a tragedy. Later that night, at 11:52 p.m., Alexandria left the bar on Oxford Square alone. Security cameras at a nearby business recorded her walking away from the bar while looking at her phone. A taxi picked her up. However, she was already in danger, as a plan to harm her had been initiated. On July 20, 2019, a Lafayette County deputy was patrolling near Lake Sardis, 30 miles north of the Ole Miss campus. At 10:23 a.m., at an abandoned fishing spot by the lake, the deputy found the body of Alexandria Costial, a 21-year-old Ole Miss student. She had been shot multiple times and was already dead. Investigators determined Alexandria had been shot 9 times, which caused her death. She was shot while sitting on a picnic bench. The shots seemed to come from different directions, suggesting the shooter moved around her in a circle. Police found 11 spent shell casings at the scene. Alexandria's purse was found in a nearby ditch. Inside, her student ID and driver's license helped police quickly identify her and determine where she lived. Police spoke with Alexandria's friends, family, and searched her apartment. Her mobile phone was missing. They tried to find its location using GPS, but the signal only showed a general area in Oxford. Luckily, Alexandria had an Apple Watch that synced with her phone. The watch was in her apartment and gave detectives a clue. Text messages sent to the phone were also on the watch. This allowed investigators to see that Alexandria had been texting Brandon Thiesfeld, a 22-year-old classmate, before she died. They discovered that Alexandria and Brandon had been planning to meet up after she left the bar, and her friends. Besides the suspicious messages, Alexandria's friends immediately mentioned Brandon as someone who might want to hurt her. Also, Brandon's roommate described him as an arrogant misogynist who frequently made offensive comments about women. Because of all this evidence, investigators asked Brandon to come to the police station for questioning. He agreed but didn't show up. When they called again, he claimed he was too drunk the previous night to meet with them. Officers soon realized he had fled. They obtained an arrest warrant and began searching for him. By tracking Brandon's cell phone and credit card activity, police discovered he was traveling toward Memphis, Tennessee. They sent a description of Brandon's truck to the Memphis Police Department's Fugitive Task Force. That same evening, just 3 days after Alexandria's death, Brandon was arrested at a gas station. A .40 caliber pistol, which matched the gun used to kill Alexandria, was found in his truck. Brandon also had blood on his shirt. Brandon claimed he was innocent and had nothing to do with Alexandria's death, but police arrested him and charged him with murder. He was sent back to Mississippi and jailed with no bail. He wouldn't talk to the police without a lawyer. Investigators then tried to find out what Brandon did the weekend Alexandria was murdered. They discovered he spent time with friends, going bowling, and seemed to act normally. On Sunday, Brandon visited a friend's house with a pistol and a 6-pack of beer. They drank and practiced shooting at cans, which his friends said was normal behavior for Brandon. The next morning, Brandon was gone. Brandon had a seemingly promising life. He was raised in a good Christian family and received lots of love. His parents were doctors, and his father owned his own clinic. He appeared to have had a typical Texas childhood, enjoying spending time outdoors hunting and fishing. In school, he played football and was never noticed displaying any violence. He had never even been in a single fight. Soon after enrolling at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Brandon met Alexandria at a bar. It was immediately clear that Alexandria liked Brandon much more than he liked her. Their relationship became complicated when both were sophomores. Due to the large number of messages Alexandria sent him, Brandon even blocked her phone number. However, something changed, and they started communicating again. On the 23rd of July, Brandon appeared in court for the first time and was formally charged with Alexandria's murder. Why would a student who appeared to be in love commit such a terrible act? Investigators looked for answers in the many text messages between Brandon and Alexandria. The reason they found was more heartbreaking than anyone expected. In April 2019, 3 months before she passed away, Alexandria was studying for her spring semester finals. Around the same time, without her family or friends knowing, she suspected she might be pregnant. On the 12th of April, she texted Brandon about her late period, suggesting she might be pregnant. Brandon asking her to keep it a secret from their friends and her parents for now. 2 days later, Alexandria sent Brandon a photo of a pregnancy test. The test results were unclear because the second line was very faint. She asked if they could meet to discuss it. Brandon initially ignored her message. He refused to meet with Alexandria and said that if she were pregnant, he wanted her to end the pregnancy immediately, suggesting she take medication. Brandon made it clear that he does not want a child because it would ruin his life. He will not support Alexandria if she chooses to have the baby, and despite how harsh this may seem, he will not change his mind. Brandon was adamant in his conviction and repeatedly told Alexandria that he didn't want to tie his future to hers. However, Alexandria only asked for a face-to-face conversation. He continued to avoid her, and eventually, communication was reduced to electronic messages. Several times they arranged dates, but each time he canceled at the last minute and didn't show up. Alexandria, despite the ambiguous test result, continued writing to Brandon day and night. Many of her messages were long, candid, and quite disturbing. Finding herself in a difficult situation, Alexandria was afraid to tell her parents. She tried her best to hide her pain and confusion about what to do. According to her messages, she even tried to drink a large amount of alcohol to end her torment. At one point, she wrote that she had drunk a full bottle of tequila, 2 bottles of champagne, 7 cans of beer, and a glass of wine. Alexandria seemingly wanted to induce alcohol poisoning. This showed how desperately she needed his attention and support. However, he didn't care about what was happening to her. Such behavior revealed a lot about his character. In reality, Brandon was only interested in himself. Many considered him a daddy's boy because he constantly flaunted the fact that his father's money could get him out of any trouble. Only this time, he was badly mistaken. When it came to evidence against Brandon, there was plenty. In addition to the bullet casings matching his pistol, the blood on his shirt, and the text messages confirming his meeting with Alexandria that night, a letter found in Brandon's apartment also pointed to his guilt. This handwritten letter to his parents, discovered during the police search after his arrest, didn't explicitly confess to the murder. However, it alluded to the crime, revealing Brandon's distress over his actions. He told his parents he was a bad person, but that it wasn't their fault. He explained that he had always struggled with disturbing thoughts, made worse by alcohol and banned substance, and that he felt his life was ending, whether in prison or death, as he believed capture was inevitable. Brandon's lawyer later claimed that the letter found was Brandon's suicide note. The lawyer said Brandon intended to kill himself after killing Alexandria, but he failed. Regardless of whether the note was actually a suicide note, it was just one piece of evidence suggesting Brandon was guilty. The investigation revealed further evidence suggesting the crime was premeditated, specifically on Friday, the 12th of July, a week before Alexandria's death. Brandon drove from Oxford to his parents' home in Fort Worth to get his pistol. He then photographed the gun and posted it on his account with the caption, "Finally bringing my baby back to Oxford." The investigators examined Brandon's internet search history and found disturbing searches from the week before Alexandria's murder. He had searched for things like how to get away with committing a crime, how to plan a murder, how to tie people up, and how to lure them into a trap. He also looked up tactical face masks, full metal jacket ammunition, and gun silencers. Most disturbingly, he tricked Alexandria into meeting him by making her believe he wanted to discuss her pregnancy. Brandon's lawyer argued that his internet search history didn't prove he planned to shoot Alexandria. The attorney argued that Brandon went to Mississippi because he wanted to practice shooting at the Oxford shooting ranges, and that people often shoot there. However, prosecutors maintained that Brandon's trip to Texas and internet searches showed a carefully planned scheme. On the 18th of July, a little before 2:00 a.m., Alexandria sent Brandon a photo of her pregnant belly. This message may have pushed Brandon over the edge. Overcome with fear, he decided to immediately carry out his plan to get rid of the problem permanently. That day, Brandon inquired whether Alexandria's friends would be present during his visit. Alexandria, believing he wanted to maintain confidentiality due to the sensitivity of the topic, readily and nervously agreed to meet in private. She felt immense relief that they would finally discuss her pregnancy. On the 19th, Brandon confirmed their meeting time. Alexandria agreed to meet him after she left the bar early, promising to come home so they could talk without distractions. Surveillance footage showed Brandon's truck, identified by its unique license plate, driving towards Alexandria's house at 1:14 a.m. The same camera later recorded the truck driving away. GPS data from Alexandria's and Brandon's phones showed they were near each other as they drove from Oxford to Lake Sardis. Brandon was heavily intoxicated from drinking the day before and continued drinking after arriving at Lake Sardis. While he and Alexandria discussed her pregnancy at a picnic table, Brandon became angry. He went to his car, where he had a white powder substance and ingested it. He then returned to the table with a pistol and began shooting Alexandria. She was shot at least 9 times. One bullet struck the table. Witnesses reported hearing several gunshots between 2:15 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. GPS data showed that both mobile phones moved back towards Oxford at 10:03 a.m. Less than an hour later, Brandon searched online for information about monitoring police channels and news about Lake Sardis, Mississippi. For the next several hours, both phones connected to the same cell towers until Alexandria's phone lost signal. It seemed Brandon turned off and discarded Alexandria's phone. Meanwhile, he socialized with friends, drank beer, and showed off his pistol, acting as if nothing was wrong. As the investigation proceeded, over 100 people gathered to remember Alexandria. Following a vigil, Alexandria's funeral was held on July 27, 2019, at Concordia Lutheran Kirkwood Church. Friends and family gathered to say goodbye. By August 2019, Brandon's case became a major news story. The grand jury reviewed the evidence, and the details of the case shocked the community, including university staff, students, and other residents of Oxford. On the 22nd of August, Brandon attended a court hearing to request bail, but his lawyer withdrew the request. Instead, the lawyer asked the judge to order a psychological evaluation for Brandon. The lawyer seemed to be trying to get a lighter sentence for Brandon by suggesting he had mental health issues and delaying the legal proceedings. The judge agreed to both requests. Brandon was sent to jail without bail and would undergo a psychological assessment. A psychological evaluation determined that Brandon was mentally fit to stand trial. Alexandria's grieving family and friends gathered outside the courthouse and continued to do so while waiting for justice to be served. The Costiel family deeply grieved the loss of their daughter. Her parents, Cindy and Keith, refused to read Alexandria's messages with Brandon discovered by investigators, burdened by the belief that they had failed to recognize their child's emotional distress and the gravity of her situation. It would have been even more excruciating for them to read how heartlessly the man their daughter loved treated her. As Brandon awaited trial for Alexandria's death, prosecutors prepared their case. They hoped text messages between Brandon and Alexandria would reveal what happened before her death. On August 30, 2019, Brandon appeared in court and was charged with kidnapping and murdering Alexandria Costiel. In Mississippi, these crimes can result in the death penalty. Despite significant evidence against him, he initially pleaded not guilty. The trial eventually happened. On the 27th of August, 2021, Brandon changed his plea and accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Alexandria Costiel in exchange for a reduced sentence. State authorities agreed to this deal because obtaining a death sentence would have been more challenging and required more evidence. As a result, Brandon Thiesfeld will now serve a life sentence in prison. He will be eligible for conditional release when he turns 65. Regarding the motive for the crime, Brandon's lawyer stated that his client was driven by the desire to eliminate the problem of becoming a father and wanted to end it in his own way. His intention was exacerbated by his intoxication and substance use. However, this argument failed to elicit sympathy from the jury. The most tragic aspect of this story is that the results of the home pregnancy tests that Alexandria showed Brandon were inconclusive, one clearly visible line and a second barely noticeable one. The situation could be interpreted in 2 ways. However, Alexandria's autopsy report revealed a definitive result. Alexandria was not pregnant. It's impossible to know if Alexandria was pregnant before she died. In a text message to Brandon in early July, she mentioned she was bleeding. This suggests she might have had a miscarriage, possibly caused by stress. She may have wanted to marry Brandon so much that she convinced herself she was pregnant. If she had known Brandon would kill her to escape the consequences of their relationship, she would never have insisted on meeting him or gotten into his truck. The murder of Alexandria Costiel is a heartbreaking tragedy that illustrates the devastating effects of an unhealthy relationship and psychological manipulation. Alexandria's promising life, a talented and loving student at the University of Mississippi, was cut short by the brutal actions of Brandon Thiesfeld, who was driven by fear of responsibility and selfishness. Brandon's life sentence, with the possibility of parole in 2047, brings some measure of justice to the Costio family, but the pain of losing their child and the unanswered questions that remain haunt them. The case not only shocked the Ole Miss community, but also served as a stark reminder of the importance of identifying and escaping toxic relationships, and of the need for support from family and friends during difficult times. Alexandria's legacy lives on through the love and light she brought to those around her, reminding us to cherish the values of kindness and honesty in life. Daphne Huard Boudreau was born in Quebec in 1998. After her parents separated while she was still in school, she spent her childhood split between two homes. Although both parents remained present in her life, she understood early on that she needed to create her own stability. From a young age, Daphne learned to adapt, be diplomatic, and maintain peace in her relationships and with the people around her. She wanted to work in psychology to help people struggling with difficulties. This wasn't just a career choice for her, it was something she felt strongly called to do. She thought even small acts of kindness could significantly impact someone's life, while her aspirations sometimes seemed overly optimistic, even naive. They stem from a level of certainty uncommon in teenagers. By age 18, Daphne had graduated high school and was preparing for the next stage. Choosing her profession and living independently, she already had a part-time job at a small store to feel financially free. On the outside, she seemed confident, but those close to her knew she was fragile. Daphne struggled in stressful situations. Particularly when dealing with strong emotions, she found it hard to say no to people, especially if she thought they needed help. She often prioritized others' feelings over her own, driven by pity, compassion, and a fear of causing pain. This made her easily manipulated. Daphne rarely talked about her own life, preferring to focus on the lives of others. Even when she was struggling, she tried to hide her feelings so she wouldn't burden anyone. Anthony Pratt Lops also was born in Quebec, but from near infancy, he was placed into foster care. By age 1.5, he had been moved through 3 foster homes. Social services had removed him from his biological family due to serious neglect, a lack of basic care, and unhealthy living conditions. Anthony experienced difficult early childhood traumas, which deeply affected him. Psychologists later observed that he struggled to form emotional bonds with others. Social services attempted to create a stable home life for him, but the frequent changes he endured during his early years hindered his development. As a result, Anthony's development was delayed, and he displayed aggressive outbursts and unpredictable actions. Even his preschool teachers had trouble building a relationship with him. He didn't trust, never felt safe around adults, and perceived closeness as a threat. He took rejection deeply to heart, couldn't handle uncertainty, and saw any limit or rule as a personal slight. Anthony lacked the skills to cope with inner distress. When overwhelmed, he either lashed out or shut down completely. During his teenage years, professionals started paying more attention to him. Teachers reported issues with his behavior, and caregivers noted his struggles with social interaction. However, his aggressive behavior stemmed from a deep-seated fear of being abandoned. This fear fueled his actions, making close relationships strained and unstable. He perceived separations not as normal occurrences, but as devastating events. As Anthony aged, he learned to hide his inner struggles, but he never learned to cope with them. He seemed calm on the surface, but inside, he was still the scared boy who couldn't understand why he'd been abandoned and feared being abandoned again. This emotional immaturity, hidden behind his adult appearance, made his actions unpredictable. When he felt he was losing control, he overreacted, treating it like a personal disaster with sudden and overwhelming emotion. As an adult, Anthony had a history of legal problems, unpredictable behavior, and defiance of rules and authority. Law enforcement considered him likely to react impulsively under stress. His file noted his potential risk and advised officers to be careful when dealing with him. However, he received no official monitoring or ongoing assistance. In February 2015, 16-year-old Daphne met Anthony, who was 20. They met unexpectedly and soon started dating. Daphne was in her last year of high school and wanted to feel like an adult, even though she didn't know what she wanted to do after graduation. Being with Anthony made her feel more grown up. Despite the age gap and their different levels of maturity and experience, Anthony was very attentive. He messaged and called her often and frequently offered her rides. Initially, Daphne, who tended to trust people, he thought he was genuinely caring and saw his attention as affection. Their relationship seemed normal at first, so early warning signs were missed. Meanwhile, Daphne's parents were worried about her relationship with Anthony from the beginning. They were concerned because Anthony was much older than Daphne. Their relationship was moving very fast, and Anthony avoided them. He seldom came to their house. When he did, he seemed uncomfortable and withdrawn. However, they decided not to get involved directly. Daphne was an adult, and they trusted her to make good choices. Daphne assured them that everything was all right, but didn't tell them much about the relationship. In the beginning, their relationship was peaceful. Anthony and Daphne enjoyed spending time together, taking walks, talking, and making future plans. Anthony suggested they move out together once Daphne turned 18, assuring her they could handle it and that it was time for her to become independent. Daphne was unsure at first, but she eventually agreed, flattered that an older man treated her as an equal. She knew Anthony didn't have a stable job and depended on financial aid, but she wasn't concerned then. He explained his health problems were the reason, and that it was only temporary. Daphne believed that support and understanding were the most important aspects of a relationship, so she was patient. Even though she covered most of their expenses, it didn't worry her at the time. Around that time, Anthony began to act possessively, but not in an obviously threatening way. He was jealous of her classmates and friends, bothered by her activity on social media, and curious about her past relationships. Sometimes, he suggested she avoid spending time with people who didn't value their relationship. At the time, this seemed like normal jealousy in a relationship and wasn't clearly abusive. Neither she nor her family suspected how dangerous Anthony would eventually become. To others, their romance seemed normal, full of feelings, dreams, and future plans. However, even then, Anthony was subtly establishing control, creating dependency, and blurring the lines of their personal boundaries. Daphne didn't realize that she was becoming less independent, constantly changing her behavior to match her partner's feelings. Over time, she gave up more of what she wanted and started believing that love meant being patient, understanding, and sacrificing herself because it felt like her choice and not something forced. No one recognized the warning signs. When Daphne turned 18, she and Anthony rented an apartment. Although her parents were worried, they tried to respect her independence. The apartment's location near her hometown gave them a false sense of security. Daphne wanted to prove she could be independent, manage her life, and have a serious relationship. However, daily life revealed hidden problems. Living with Anthony was stressful. He was unemployed and not in school, so he spent most of his time at home. This made him more irritable and jealous. He demanded constant attention, questioned who she spoke to, checked her phone, and became suspicious of anything outside their routine. His behavior swung between being overly affectionate and having angry outbursts. Daphne soon realized that any attempt to spend time with friends or leave the apartment would trigger Anthony's hostility or sulking. Even brief phone calls caused arguments. Eventually, he began criticizing her clothes, speech, and even facial expressions. Any minor issue could lead to a fight. Daphne carried the weight of their daily life. She worked to pay for rent and food, managed all the housework, and tried to maintain their relationship. However, the stress continued to increase. Anthony often reminded her of a time he had contemplated end his own life, using guilt to manipulate her emotionally. He told her he depended on her for his survival, saying he wouldn't live if she left him. This made Daphne feel responsible for his life, trapping her in an increasingly draining situation. Daphne's attempt to leave Anthony triggered a major crisis. When she announced the breakup and started packing, Anthony reacted violently. He trashed their apartment, breaking objects, tossing her things around. Neighbors alerted the emergency services. When the police arrived, they recorded the damage. Daphne's parents assisted her in gathering her remaining belongings and leaving. Anthony was not arrested, but the police gave him a warning and told him to stay calm. Daphne went back to live with her parents for a while. She felt emotionally exhausted but tried not to show it. Anthony persisted in contacting Daphne even after everything that had happened. He sent messages, called repeatedly, and left voicemails filled with apologies. He attributed his behavior to stress and vowed to change. He claimed his actions stemmed from despair, not anger. As time went on, he began to beg for her sympathy, saying he was losing sleep, unable to eat, and constantly contemplating end his own life. He accused her of abandoning him when he needed her most, insisting that she was the only person who mattered to him. Daphne felt conflicted. Despite being afraid and disappointed, she couldn't completely sever ties with him. She felt a combination of pity, guilt, and worry for his well-being. She was too young to clearly understand the difference between love and emotional dependence, or between attachment and obligation. Her parents tried to dissuade her from returning to him, but they couldn't legally stop her from reconnecting, and gentle persuasion hadn't been effective. At the same time, Anthony also started trying to isolate Daphne again. He told her that her family and friends had turned her against him and that they didn't understand how fragile he was. He appealed to her sense of empathy, promising to get therapy, find a job, and change for the better. He begged for one last chance to prove himself. Daphne, who always wanted to see the good in people, found his words convincing. She didn't want to believe that Anthony was incapable of change. When she returned to him, she hoped they could find stability, but the situation remained the same. The periods of calm didn't last long before jealousy and a need to control took over. He constantly checked her messages. It demanded she explain where she was going and what she was doing, claiming it was out of concern. He restricted who she could see, made hurtful comments about how she looked, and attempted to control her choices every day. Her emotions were constantly up and down. One day, he would shower her with attention. The next, he would be angry if she showed any independence. Daphne became more and more silent. She tried not to cause arguments and stopped making plans for the future. She lost her confidence. She stopped telling anyone about her problems, becoming private and distant. She worried that breaking up again might end badly. But she also knew that the relationship was slowly destroying who she was. Anthony felt he was taking back control, but not by being aggressive. Instead, he made Daphne emotionally dependent on him. He constantly pressured her, though subtly. He used guilt trips, the silent treatment, and accused her of betraying him whenever she tried to be independent. He made her believe he needed her to survive, and that something terrible would happen if she left. This created a harmful pattern. Because of this, Daphne couldn't think clearly anymore. She was always stressed, never fully believing she could leave without him suffering serious consequences. Trying to save him had gradually cost her control of her own life. In March 2017, Daphne decided to break up with Anthony. There was no fight or big scene. She didn't explain her reasons, only that she had tried to fix things too many times before. She packed her belongings and moved out of their apartment silently. Afterward, she divided her time between her mother's and father's houses. Because her parents were divorced, she could easily move between their homes and avoid staying in one place for very long. Anthony couldn't accept the breakup. For him, it was only a temporary separation. He continued to send her text messages every day, sometimes pleading, sometimes accusing. He called her, but Daphne didn't answer. So, he contacted her parents. He messaged her mother to find out where Daphne was, but he didn't get a response. Then, he contacted her friends and acquaintances to see who she might be staying with. He monitored her social media activity to see if she had logged on. His attempts to reach her became increasingly obsessive. Daphne turned off her phone, knowing that any contact with Anthony would be a mistake. In response, he began to act through other people. He asked friends to drive by Daphne's parents' house to see if her car was there. He looked for excuses to see her, anything that might create a chance encounter. For him, her silence was not a rejection, but an obstacle to overcome. At the same time, Anthony discovers that Daphne is dating another man. He didn't know much about it, but the news upset him deeply. He felt abandoned. humiliated, and betrayed. He took it very personally and struggled to understand it as her choice. As a result, his emotions became more and more erratic. Anthony wanted to share his feelings, so he recorded a video and posted it online. In the video, which was several minutes long, he accused Daphne of betraying and using him, saying she had ruined his life. He claimed he had done everything for her, but she had rejected him. He also said he loved her, but she never appreciated it. Although he didn't directly threaten her, the video's tone was disturbing, and it was obvious he was very upset. Before the event, things were strained. Daphne knew Anthony was trying to contact her, but she tried to hide her fear. She didn't want to alarm her parents, so she kept them out of it, hoping that ignoring Anthony would make him stop. She didn't understand how extreme someone who couldn't accept rejection might become. On the cold, snowy night of March 22, 2017, Anthony left his home around 2 a.m. He walked to Daphne's father's house, a journey of nearly 2 hours in freezing temperatures because he didn't own a car. This was a planned action. Anthony knew Daphne was staying with her father temporarily and that she would be leaving for work early that morning. Around 3:45 a.m., Anthony arrived at Daphne's house, making sure not to be seen or heard. He concealed himself in her mother's car, which was parked in the driveway. Daphne's mother had lent her the car because Daphne's own car was being repaired. Anthony knew Daphne used her mother's car to get to her part-time job at a small grocery store. He planned to wait for her and make her talk to him. Daphne left her house quietly around 4:30 a.m. When she reached her car, she found Anthony in the back seat. He wasn't trying to leave. Instead, he insisted they talk. Surprised, Daphne calmly asked him to get out, but he wouldn't. Because she was short on time and wanted to avoid a scene, she got in the driver's seat and drove, taking him with her in silence. Even though Anthony didn't threaten her or seem aggressive, his being there felt like a way of pressuring her. Daphne and Anthony arrived at Daphne's workplace. Daphne entered the store, and Anthony followed. His behavior immediately concerned Daphne's coworkers. He seemed tense, watchful, and wouldn't leave Daphne alone, making them uneasy. They decided to call the police. When the police arrived, they observed Anthony's persistent behavior. They spoke with him privately and found him to be emotionally unstable but not aggressive. Daphne declined to press charge, stating she wasn't afraid of Anthony and that he hadn't threatened or harmed her. She assured the police she had the situation under control and asked them to refrain from further action. The police gave Anthony a verbal warning. He then called a cab and left. The situation de-escalated without any legal violations. Afterward, Daphne seemed exhausted but hid her feelings. She continued working, finished her tasks, and didn't talk about the incident with anyone. She hoped it was finished. She felt like it was just another outburst from her ex, who would eventually lose interest. Daphne didn't feel unsafe or threatened, just tired and wanting to move on. Daphne tried to ignore Anthony, hoping that by avoiding him, the situation wouldn't get worse. However, Anthony was already determined to act. The day after their breakup, Daphne went to Anthony's apartment to get her things. She was very worried about her cat and lizards she had left there. She feared that Anthony, out of anger or desperation, might hurt them. She told her friends and family she was scared he might abandon or neglect the animals. Daphne went to the local police station before visiting her ex-boyfriend's apartment. She informed the officers about her plan and expressed her fear for her safety. Anthony, her ex-boyfriend, was already known to the police. The officer she spoke with strongly recommended that she not go alone. As a safety measure, a female officer was assigned to follow Daphne discreetly in a separate car. The officer would stay close enough to help if needed, but far enough away to avoid being noticed. They arrived at the building around noon. As Daphne entered the building, the policewoman waited outside. After waiting longer than expected without seeing Daphne return, the policewoman quickly followed. However, she mistakenly entered the wrong section of the complex. After several minutes of double-checking the address, she finally found the correct entrance and floor. Unfortunately, this delay had serious consequences. When she got to the apartment door, everything was silent. She knocked, but no one answered. Then, she saw a shadow move behind the glass, and a man's voice said, "Arrest me." Anthony opened the door. his hands bloody. He calmly raised them, saying to the officer, "This isn't my blood." He followed the officer's instructions without resisting. The officer called for backup and an ambulance, then entered the apartment. It was silent inside. Near the stairs, she found Daphne's body on the floor. Daphne was dead. Daphne's autopsy showed she had been stabbed 15 times, mostly in the chest and neck. Her throat was also cut. One stab wound was deadly by itself. The other wounds indicated the attacker was experiencing intense emotional distress and uncontrolled anger. The evidence suggests a sudden, violent outburst of rage. The delay and the error with the building entrance were both elements in a series of unfortunate events. Although law enforcement acted according to procedure, this situation highlighted a critical reality. When confronting a potentially dangerous individual, even a minor delay can have fatal consequences. The crime scene clearly showed what happened. Blood was splattered throughout the apartment. Palm prints marked a table leg, and shoe prints were near the door. The attacker didn't try to hide anything or fake a robbery. It looked like a planned, personal attack fueled by intense emotion. Anthony was arrested immediately. At the police station, he confessed to the crime. He didn't deny doing it or try to excuse his actions. He only said he had gone too far and that it occurred quickly. He didn't provide many details and didn't seem sorry. His physical condition was recorded as stable. He had no apparent injuries and refused medical help. While the first interviews were being conducted, Daphne's family learned about what had occurred. Her father was the first to be notified. Initially, he didn't understand how serious the situation was. The police call was short and didn't provide many details. He was simply told that there had been an incident and that he needed to come to the station immediately. It wasn't until he arrived at the station that he learned the truth. His daughter was died. Daphne's mother was stunned. While her father refused to accept the reality until the end, they never imagined it would come to this. Following Anthony's arrest, the investigation didn't take long. He pleaded guilty to taking Daphne's life, and in 2019, the case went to trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without eligibility for parole for the first 18 years. However, the case sparked public outcry, not only due to the brutality of the act, but also because of how the charges were handled. Anthony's charge was reduced to second-degree murder as part of a plea agreement, meaning the court didn't find evidence of premeditation. While this ruling meant Anthony wasn't legally considered to have planned the murder, Daphne's family, particularly her father, was devastated. He strongly felt the murder was premeditated, pointing to the fact that the attack happened almost immediately after Daphne entered Anthony's apartment, and there had been no prior argument. He believed these details suggested a planned, first-degree crime. Following the funeral, Daphne's family applied to the Crime Victim Compensation Board for help with their grief and trauma. Daphne's father was deeply distraught, and her mother couldn't return to work. However, their application was rejected. The board stated that because Daphne's parents were not directly harmed in the crime, they weren't eligible for financial assistance. This decision was shocking to the family. Even though they lost their daughter to a violent crime, they were considered indirect victims and denied support. The family filed an appeal. The process took time, but eventually the decision was reversed. The parents were granted partial compensation, mainly to cover expenses for psychological counseling and lost income. The financial sum was modest, but its symbolic value was significant. It marked an acknowledgement that the system recognized the weight of their loss. Meanwhile, questions were being raised in the media and public forums about law enforcement's role in the case. In particular, attention turned to the two officers involved on the day of the crime. One had been assigned to follow Daphne to the apartment, but made a critical error, entering the wrong section of the building and arriving several minutes late. The other was the officer who had taken her initial report and failed to strongly advise full accompaniment. Both officers later faced internal ethics reviews. However, no disciplinary action was taken. Officially, their conduct did not violate procedure. For Daphne's father, this was a devastating blow. He publicly criticized what he saw as a failure to recognize the danger. In his view, Anthony's history of emotional instability and threatening behavior, especially after the surveillance incidents, alarming messages, and the confrontation at her workplace, should have been taken far more seriously. He believed police could have intervened earlier and potentially prevented the tragedy. Years went by, but Daphne's family still felt the system had let them down. They not only grieved for their daughter, but also had to struggle to prove her death wasn't accidental, but resulted from a situation that could have been prevented. The police, prosecutors, and social services all failed to intervene in time, and afterwards, no one took responsibility. In Quebec, Daphne's case became a prime example of how the difference between psychological aggression and a direct threat can be dangerously ignored. Delays, bureaucracy, and a lack of urgency can be fatal. Brandy and Jason met when they were teenagers in the early 2000s. At ages 15 and 16, by 2007, they were engaged. And 2 years later, they married, beginning their life together in the suburbs with hopes of raising a family. Their first child, Tyler, was born in 2009. 10 weeks early, he faced serious health challenges initially, but quickly bounced back, growing into a bright and cheerful boy. The boy is loved at school because of his intelligence and cheerful personality. Outside of school, Tyler was very active. He loved Pokemon in all its forms, including games, cards, and television shows, and spent his spare time playing sports such as basketball, baseball, hockey, and football. The boy, inspired by his father, dreams of becoming a software engineer in the future. In 2013, the family welcomed their second child, a baby girl named Charlie. Tyler embraced his baby sister warmly, showering her with hugs and expressions of love. Charlie, though still young, had her own distinct personality. She attended the Wilson Early Learning Center, danced, participated in basketball camps, and enjoyed dressing up, especially as Elsa from Frozen. Her days were filled with play and music. Brandy, now a full-time mom, actively engaged with her community, often organizing parties for the neighborhood kids. She was known for her kindness and friendliness, and to those around her, her family seemed like the perfect family, loving, devoted, and tightly knit. However, by 2015, things began to change. Jason took on an intense new job that demanded 60 hours a week. His intention was to provide for his family, but it came at a significant personal cost. Brandy often expressed feelings of loneliness, while Jason reassured her that this was just a temporary situation that would improve soon. Unexpectedly, the emotional gap between them widened. In May 2015, Jason noticed that Brandy had set a password on her phone, which she had never done before. When he inquired about it, she became flustered and gave an unclear explanation, mentioning a surprise for Father's Day. Days later, she revealed that she was planning to create an in-home office for him so he could work more closely with the family. What bothered Jason was not the idea itself, but that she had asked their 51-year-old neighbor for help with the construction. At social gatherings, Jason began noticing Brandy's strange behavior. She laughed at every joke the neighbor made, leaned in closely to him, and seemed to ignore Jason and the kids. The way she looked at the neighbor felt more intimate than mere friendship. He now visited their home daily to assist with the office renovations. Jason tried to dismiss his concerns, thinking perhaps stress and exhaustion were clouding his judgment. But unease persisted. Feeling increasingly uneasy, Jason began checking the GPS settings on Brandy's phone and discovered that it had been mysteriously disabled, another worrying sign. One evening, while watching a movie together, Brandy left her phone unlocked to use the bathroom. For the first time, Jason felt compelled to look through it. He found a single message to the neighbor that was unmistakably flirtatious, suggesting a deeper conversation had taken place. Then Jason discovers that an app on Brandy's phone automatically deletes messages, indicating that she is being unfaithful. The secrecy, Brandy's changed behavior, and the growing tension in their home all pointed to a reality Jason wasn't ready to face. Rather than confronting her directly, he decided to act carefully. Pretending to install antivirus software, he asked for her phone, and she handed it over without suspicion. While installing the antivirus app, Jason also added software that forwarded Brandy's messages to his phone. Within days, his worst fears were confirmed. Brandy was having an affair with their neighbor. He watched in silence as Brandy sent flirtatious messages to the neighbor while home alone with the kids at his mother's house. She even tried to arrange a hangout with her neighbor and his wife. Jason, who knew the truth, also agreed to join. At the restaurant, Brandy and the neighbor seem inseparable, enjoying conversation and laughter, while Jason awkwardly talks to the neighbor's wife, pretending not to know about the affair. Later, the neighbor's wife suggested that she and Brandy go to a movie, while Jason volunteered to stay home and watch the kids, including those of the neighbors. While they were out, Jason quietly scrolled through Brandy's messages, which revealed more than mere harmless flirting. He found explicit texts, intimate photos, and plans for a private meeting the following Monday. The realization of the betrayal hit him hard. When Brandy returned from the movie, Jason wasted no time. He asked her and the neighbor's wife to sit down. He sent the children into another room and looked at the two women across from him. In a calm but determined manner, he asked if Brandy and the neighbor were in love with each other. Brandy denied everything, claiming it was a misunderstanding. However, when Jason showed her the messages and photos, her story shifted. She admitted to the texting but insisted it was a one-time occurrence, claiming there was no physical affair. Despite the evidence suggesting otherwise, feeling cornered, the neighbor's wife tried to downplay the situation, saying that if there was no physical relationship, there was no reason to ruin the marriage. Ultimately, they agreed on a temporary separation. Jason would stay in the family home while Brandy moved in with her mother, taking the kids with her, but it doesn't stop there. Brandy threatens that if Jason attempts to gain custody, she will disclose a dark secret from his past when he struggled with thoughts of self-harm. It was something he had gone through years ago, never hiding it, but now it was being used against him. This threat deeply unsettled Jason. When Brandy left, he hoped she would protect the children, Tyler and Charlie, from their adult problems. Instead, she told them their father was angry and that they couldn't stay with him anymore, leaving them devastated and believing they had been abandoned. That moment devastated Jason more than anything else. The pain of betrayal was nothing compared to seeing his children suffer. He began to doubt whether a divorce would really help or just add to their trauma. Fearing that Brandy might use their emotions against him, he made a difficult choice. He asked Brandy to stay, not out of forgiveness or love, but to protect their children. He suppressed his feelings and chose what he believed would maintain a semblance of family. For now, Brandy agreed to stay. But under one condition, Jason had to apologize to the neighbor, the man she had cheated with. Since their children were close, she insisted they continue interacting. Reluctantly, Jason complied. It's not out of remorse, but because he felt it was essential for his children's well-being. Despite the affair and the emotional turmoil, Jason worked to keep his family united, attending birthdays and neighborhood events while distancing himself emotionally. He wore a smile that often didn't reflect his inner feelings. In his quiet moments, Jason found himself consumed with thoughts about how to keep Brandy happy to prevent her from seeking affection elsewhere. His focus shifted from love to simply avoiding more conflict. Nearly a year after the affair was discovered, around Father's Day, Brandy sent another explicit photo to the neighbor. She claimed that it was a mistake, meant for Jason and not for the neighbor. Jason didn't believe her, but he chose not to confront her again because he felt emotionally drained. While their life appeared stable on the surface, Jason was struggling internally. He became obsessive, analyzing Brandy's every word, look, and gesture. Jason's sleep was negatively affected, leading to a decline in his work performance. He feared that if he divorced now, after begging Brandy to stay, it would lead to revenge. He worried she could manipulate the children or the legal system, putting their kids, Tyler and Charlie, in the middle. Jason felt trapped. Every option looked worse than staying with Brandy. He decided to keep his grief to himself, not wanting to worry his mother anymore. Few of his friends understood him. Although one suggested turning to God, it wasn't a path he wanted to take. Instead, he reached out to strangers on Reddit, sharing his story, receiving overwhelming support. Thousands of people read his post and responded, assuring him he wasn't alone and that both he and his children deserve better. Other fathers shared their experiences of overcoming betrayal and rebuilding their lives. In a later update, Jason explained that Brandy had repeatedly refused to attend therapy. Even before the affair, after years of enduring emotional pain for the sake of others, he made a bold decision to put himself and his children first. He contacted a divorce attorney and quickly learned about his rights regarding custody and legal protections. Later that day, he delivered divorce papers to Brandy. What happened next was not relief. At 4:34 a.m., on November 17, 2016, Brandy called 911. Her voice was shaky as she informed the operator that she had taken a large amount of Benadryl and had attacked her children upstairs. When emergency responders arrived, they found Brandy on the couch, blood on her hands, looking pale and emotionless. Upstairs, they found Tyler, 7, and Charlie, 3. Both were given Benadryl and were attacked. Tragically, neither child survived. Brandy had taken their lives before they could be taken from her. Believing her actions were justified, the fight to keep the peace ended in a horrific act of violence. And Jason, who had always wanted to protect his children from pain, now lives with indelible pain. The medical examiner determined that the injuries to Tyler and Charlie were severe, indicating that the violence was more than necessary to end a life. Brandy remained conscious and was quickly taken to the hospital for a self-inflicted neck wound, which was not life-threatening. She recovered quickly and was soon able to speak with investigators. Meanwhile, the bodies of Tyler and Charlie lay upstairs in the room where they had gone to sleep the night before. During police interviews, Jason recounted the disintegration of his marriage, the betrayal, and his painful decision to stay for the children's sake. He described the affair, sleepless nights, Brandy's refusal of therapy, and the anonymous plea for help he had shared online. But what haunted him most was what Brandy had said when she was arrested. When she said he couldn't take the kids from her, her tone was cold and direct, lacking anger. This was a bitter admission of her motive. The divorce papers had triggered something in her. She was intent on not just hurting Jason, but on destroying his future. Jason recalled the day before as completely normal. It was Thursday, November 16. He had prepared the kids for school, dropped them off, and then went to work. That evening, he left work early to attend Charlie's dance recital, where Brandy and Tyler were present. They all smiled, clapped, and came home together as a family. That night, Tyler told Brandy that he needed some wooden sticks for a project at school. Brandy offered to go to Walmart to buy them. While she was away, Jason took care of the children, giving them baths and putting them to bed. When Brandy came back, she kissed the kids goodnight. Before heading to bed, she asked Jason if he wanted to sleep on the couch in the living room instead of in the basement like usual. He chose the basement. He had no idea this would be the last time he saw his children alive. In the middle of the night, Jason was abruptly awakened by Brandy's screams. As she discovered the horrifying scene, Jason rushed upstairs. The police were already en route. As news of the tragedy spread, Jason's story gained traction online. His earlier Reddit post went viral, revealing the heartbreaking truth to thousands who had been following him anonymously. In a follow-up post, Jason thanked the community for their support, sharing news articles and expressing his gratitude for their kindness. However, not all responses were positive. He received cruel messages accusing him of weakness and failure to protect his children. Some even suggested he should have left sooner or blamed him for what happened. The backlash was overwhelming. Jason deleted his original Reddit account and created a new one. Not to hide, but to continue sharing his story. Through this new account, he wrote about his survivor's guilt and the pressure on fathers to protect their children. Constantly wondering if he could have saved them if he had chosen the couch that night. After the murders, Jason put aside his pride and created a GoFundMe campaign for funeral expenses. Not expecting much, but wanting to give his children a proper goodbye. Unexpectedly, YouTuber Philip DeFranco found the story and shared it with his millions of followers. The donations poured in quickly, far exceeding Jason's original goal. Thanks to the generosity of strangers, he was able to bury Tyler and Charlie with dignity. Though their lives were cut short by a horrific act, They were honored and mourned by thousands who had never met them. After 11 days in the hospital recovering from a self-inflicted injury, Brandy was discharged and taken into custody for questioning. Initially, she appeared emotional and fragile, but this facade quickly faded. During later interviews, she became cold and robotic. It took several sessions for investigators to get meaningful information from her. She claimed she was insane, and her defense argued that untreated mental illness, particularly depression and anxiety, warped her perception of reality. However, toxicology reports revealed a different story. Brandy had taken a large dose of Benadryl, a sedative, which is not commonly linked to violent behavior. Psychiatric evaluations concluded she was fully aware of her actions. Evidence also suggested premeditation. Security footage revealed that her late-night trip to Walmart was not just for school supplies. She purchased a large combat knife, which is more suited for hunting than for crafting. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was planned. That night, after dinner and bedtime stories, Brandy made her move. Jason was unaware of what was about to happen. She hid the knife in the kitchen and asked Jason if he wanted to sleep in the living room or the basement. He chose the basement, leaving her alone. Once he was downstairs, Brandy took the knife and the Benadryl upstairs. She woke Tyler and invited the boy to sleep in Charlie's room. Excited, he followed her into the darkness, where she tragically murdered both children. Leaving the knife behind, she called her mother for help. On March 19, 2018, Brandy Worley was sentenced to 120 years in prison, 65 years for the murder of Charlie, and 55 years for Tyler. Jason attended the court proceedings, and when given the opportunity to speak, he simply stated that he never wanted to see her again because out of sight meant out of mind. Brandy is currently incarcerated at the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis and has never expressed remorse, either during the trial or afterward. Jason has done his best to move forward despite the tragedy. He lost his job for a time and withdrew from social life, but eventually returned to work and regained most of his income. He encourages others struggling with mental health issues to seek help, to be open about their pain, and persevere. He emphasizes that life is precious and should not be passed over in silence. The sentencing did not bring Jason any comfort. He never believed Brandy should receive the death penalty, which is not an option in Indiana. But he also doubted that a life sentence would provide real justice. What truly mattered to him was honoring the memories of Tyler and Charlie. However, he faced challenges from Brandy's family. After the murders, they changed the locks on their rental home and withheld his belongings, necessitating police involvement for him to retrieve them. Visiting the children's graves became increasingly difficult, particularly on the first anniversary of their deaths, when Brandy's family observed him closely, making him feel unwelcome. Consequently, he has visited less frequently than he would like. Despite everything, Jason never intended to take the children away from Brandy. He merely wanted to co-parent amicably after their divorce. When he served her divorce papers, she did not resist. Their day passed quietly, and they even attended Charlie's dance class together, shared dinner, and tucked the kids into bed. But after Brandy went to Walmart, their lives changed forever. Years later, Jason is remarried and has children again. His life today reflects resilience. Although the void left by Tyler and Charlie can never be filled, their memories are not just marked by gravestones, but influence every decision he makes and every story he shares. Their story serves as a reminder of life's fragility, the importance of love, and the possibility of survival even in the face of tragedy. Tyler and Charlie Worley, may they rest in peace, forever loved and never forgotten. It all started with a stalker, anonymous messages, footsteps behind her. The harassment escalated. Ellie called for help, called the police, but was met with silence. Then one night, Ellie disappeared. When she was found, she was no longer a vibrant woman, but a naked body wrapped in a blanket, discarded like a worthless object. A haunting ending. A warning ignored until the last minute. Who did it? A stranger or someone creepy familiar? And the most terrifying thing, if Ellie's warning had been heeded, would she still be alive? Stay with us until the end, because the truth behind Ellie's case will leave you shaken, and it forces us to ask, who let this happen? In Westchester, Ellen Ellie White, 23, lives in a cozy home. Originally from Minneapolis, Ellie had moved to Westchester with her family years earlier. She now lived on her own with her pet gecko, Gail. Ellie was vibrant and creative. She loved crafting, scrapbooking, writing, designing jewelry, and taking dance classes. Ellie had loved the outdoors since childhood. Her mother remembered her wearing pretty dresses while digging in the yard to plant flowers or build hammocks, returning inside, covered in dirt and smiling. She had just earned her cosmetology license and was entering adulthood with excitement, but in the summer of 2018, things changed. Someone began targeting Ellie. At first, it was just strange messages. Then it gradually escalated into persistent harassment. An anonymous stalker kept sending her text messages using a masked phone number along with fake accounts on Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook. This went on for nearly a year. By then, it was daily, relentless, calculated, and disturbing. Ellie believed it was the work of one person using multiple identities. Then it escalated again. A video arrived on Facebook, filmed from outside her home. It was a gross invasion of privacy, predatory and chilling. More videos followed, showing the same pattern. The stalker had found her home, her safe place. Her best friend, Hannah, described it as a sick cat and mouse game with Ellie as the prey. Ellie went to the police. She provided several usernames and numbers, including one that stood out, Mikhail or Ma. Officers asked if the name meant anything. Ellie remembered an ex from years earlier, Mikhail, but she wasn't sure. She followed the police's advice and reluctantly took self-defense classes with her mother. Ellie stopped going out at night, but the harassment continued. The messages kept coming. Accounts kept changing, and police struggled to trace anything because the numbers were masked and used random area codes. Ellie's mother contacted police again, asking for increased patrols around her home. Officers did return, but according to records, they spent only about 5 minutes searching the area. Ellie became too afraid to stay alone. Friends took turns sleeping over. Even then, the fear lingered. The stalker had already stood at her window, filming and watching. Her anxiety grew overwhelming. She texted a friend that she didn't feel safe, saying that she was alone and didn't know much self-defense, and that it was taking all of her peace of mind. While chatting with a friend, Ellie received another message, this time from a new Snapchat account named Michael Strauss. Immediately, she realized it was her ex-boyfriend. They had dated when she was 17, bonding over art, music, and festivals. But the relationship quickly soured and she cut off contact. Years later, it seemed he had resurfaced, not as a partner, but as a predator. Ellie immediately told the police. On the 28th of July, she was texting someone she believed was her online friend, Nate. They had chatted often and planned to hang out. He had written that he wasn't bringing his phone and asked if it was okay if he just knocked. At some point that day, Ellie appears to have changed her mind and decided to stay in. When Nate asked about the creepy messages, Ellie brushed it off and said that no one was creepy to her, so she didn't know. She was home alone that night, but it wasn't Nate. It was a fake name on a burner account. Now Michael knew she was alone. On August 1, 2018, Ellie stopped responding to calls and texts. Her mother grew worried and reported her missing. Everyone believed the disappearance was connected to the harassment. Ellie's car was still at home. Her phone showed no new activity. Her bank account hadn't been touched. Everything suggested something terrible had happened. One question lingered. Did police analyze her phone data before she vanished? Could they have identified the person harassing her? Westchester police declined to comment. In the weeks after Ellie disappeared, investigators gathered evidence, But the case was still classified as telecommunication harassment, not stalking, a mistake that would prove costly. One phone number tied to the fake Nate account, the one that tricked Ellie on the night she vanished, had a 213 area code. It was purchased through a site that sells temporary numbers. There was no user data attached, no activity after the night Ellie went missing, and no link to another device. Detectives kept pushing. 2 weeks later, they obtained more details from the site. The account had a username, a sign-up date, and a last login time. Most crucially, it was linked to an email address belonging to Michael Strauss, Ellie's ex-boyfriend. Michael had a long record spanning a decade: burglary, banned substance possession, identity fraud, and public indecency. After the 2015 indecency charge, a court ordered a mental health evaluation and a year of treatment. Even while Ellie was missing, Michael was still targeting other women. Just 53 minutes after the last message sent to Ellie from the 213 number, Michael created a new account on the same site. It showed a clear pattern he didn't intend to stop. After 23 days of searching, authorities confirmed the worst body found in a field in Liberty Township was Ellie's. Her remains were discovered off Milliken Road, naked, wrapped in a blanket, bound with duct tape, and with a plastic bag over her head. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Shockingly, the field was within walking distance of Michael's home. At 4:00 a.m. the next morning, Westchester police arrested him. Michael was held on a $4 million bond while police searched his home and digital devices. Evidence quickly mounted. Google records showed disturbing searches. How long does a dead body smell? Missing girl in Hamilton. Missing girl in Westchester, Ohio, and Ellie. He also researched the Cincinnati Strangler and looked up how to survive prison and a survivor's guide to prison days before Ellie disappeared. What is even more alarming is that searches are sensitive. Predatory searches, jogging abuse, den abuse adult movies. And where do women jog in Westchester? Investigators said some searches were too graphic to release publicly. His behavior extended beyond searches. Police found dozens of videos he recorded of women jogging, sometimes following them by car, other times lurking near parks. When questioned, Michael admitted filming women he found attractive, wherever he saw them. Most damning, his phone contained a Google Maps screenshot of the exact field where Ellie's body was later found. When questioned, Michael offered an absurd excuse. He claimed he was writing a script and that the field was part of his research, citing his work in the film industry. But investigators already had serious doubt. At his home, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside his art portfolio were Ellie's driver's license, a lock of her hair, and her pink necklace. He had placed these items in a metal tin he called a tribute. Detectives' patience ran out. They confronted him. Why did he have her ID, jewelry, and hair? Michael tried to adjust his statement. He said that Ellie had agreed to take part in a sensitive video for which he was reportedly paid thousands of dollars to produce. He insisted it was consensual and that Ellie knew what she was doing. He claimed that while filming at his home, she accidentally suffocated with a plastic bag over her head. According to him, the camera was rolling and captured her death. He said he panicked, deleted the footage, and threw away the memory card. But there was no evidence of any video, no camera, no memory card, no proof. What investigators did find were handcuffs attached to a bed frame in his basement. There was no plausible scenario in which Ellie voluntarily went to his house, wrapped in a blanket with zip ties on her wrists. Every piece of evidence told the real story. Ellie had been lured, abducted, and killed. Michael Strauss was formally charged with her murder. As the case unfolded, it became clear the justice system had missed multiple chances to act, opportunities to take Ellie's fears seriously, investigate further, and stop Michael before he struck. It was too late. Ellie, vibrant, creative, and full of love, was gone. With Michael in custody, the investigation into Ellie's death entered its final stages. Law enforcement confirmed he now faced a murder charge in addition to earlier harassment-related charges. At a press conference, Authorities thanked the public, tips from Ellie's friends, community members, and countless others helped bring clarity to a complex, heartbreaking case. The investigation had grown beyond the Westchester Police Department's capacity because of its digital evidence, emotional impact, and scope. Multiple agencies joined: the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the Butler County Sheriff's Office, the Department of Natural Resources, and the FBI's Major Crimes and Behavioral Science Units. A specialized digital evidence team also worked to trace communications and online activity. Michael Strauss, 29, was indicted by a grand jury on 9 counts: aggravated murder, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, menacing by stalking, petty theft, abuse of a corpse, and gross abuse of a corpse. Ellie's funeral was not a traditional day of mourning. Guests wore tie-dye, Ellie's favorite, and brought mementos for a scrapbook. People played drums, made music, and planted seeds for flowers and trees. It wasn't just a funeral, it was a celebration of her spirit. The next day, a memorial service continued. More than 100 people gathered to remember her, releasing balloons as a symbolic letting go of pain, fear, anger, and sorrow. Others said she was love, music, laughter, pure light. Ellie touched everyone she met, and the community wanted her remembered for how she lived, not how she died. Meanwhile, the court prepared for trial. More than 800 pages of evidence were submitted. The case against Michael is complex, both digitally, physically, and testimonially. Still, his defense introduced a controversial argument. Although Michael had already admitted to killing Ellie, his attorneys moved to access her medical records and therapy notes. They argued that her mental health and prescription medications might have contributed to her death. In court, they pointed to her history of depression and anxiety, suggesting, without much detail, that her death could have been accidental and linked to medication misuse. However, the prosecution quickly dismissed that allegation, pointing to the toxicology report. It detailed exactly which substances were in Ellie's system when she died. They argued that her mental health history had nothing to do with her death. She was suffocated while bound with duct tape, wrapped in a blanket, and dumped in a field. Raising her mental health, they said, was not only irrelevant but deeply offensive. They rejected the defense's attempt to shift attention to Ellie's personal struggles. The case was about Michael Strauss, his stalking, deception, abduction, and ultimately, murder. No trial followed. Michael Strauss pleaded guilty to the murder of Ellen Ellie Wake. The plea brought some relief, but not closure. Nothing can erase what Ellie had to endure or the future she was deprived of. Still, her family, friends, and community ensured her voice was heard. Justice, however bittersweet, finally arrived. As a result of the guilty plea, 6 of Michael's original charges were dismissed, reducing his potential sentence. At sentencing, Michael addressed the court, claiming he never intended harm and expressing regret. He called himself a failure to Ellie, to society, to his family, and to hers. He said his guilt would be a lifelong burden and did not ask for forgiveness. Ellie's father, David, said he didn't know if he could ever forgive. Michael's mother offered condolences to Ellie's family and spoke of her own anguish, then asked the judge to impose the maximum penalty. The judge did so. Michael Strauss received a prison sentence of 15 years to life for aggravated murder, 18 months for menacing by stalking, and 1 year for desecrating a corpse. The sentences run consecutively. With credit for time served, he will be eligible for parole in 2036, with another opportunity in 2041. The judge noted the case did not qualify for life without parole, even though the crime's nature could have warranted it. The motive was never fully established. Prosecutors called it an act of perversion, planned, directed, and staged by Michael with himself as the central figure. Investigators stressed that Ellie did everything she could. She reported harassment, documented threats, and sought help. Yet the system failed her. An internal review of the Westchester Police Department led to discipline. Officer James Thomas received a 40-hour unpaid suspension for failing to follow proper procedures when Ellie first reported in April 2018. He did not document key details, Michael Strauss's Name, address, or his connection through Ellie's ex-boyfriend, and failed to include crucial evidence like emails, videos, and texts in the official report. That lack of urgency and inaction may have contributed to the outcome. Newly released court documents said Michael allegedly told a fellow inmate that Ellie was not his first victim, claiming he killed another woman named Shell and left her in a creek. The account echoed Ellie's case, but authorities could not identify Shell or verify the confession. There were other concerns. In January 2018, a female jogger was attacked on her usual route by a man in a black hoodie and mask. She escaped, and the attacker was never identified. But the details were consistent with Michael's known behavior. During the investigation, police found dozens of videos Michael took of women jogging. He appeared fixated on following and recording female runners, often from his car or in public spaces. Law enforcement believes there may be other victims. The full extent of Michael Strauss's actions remains unknown. In the United States, millions of people are stalked each year, and stalking often precedes more serious violence. In many homicides involving women, stalking is documented before the killing. Ellie's story reflects this broader reality, where repeated warnings are ignored and prevention systems fall short. Ellie reported her stalker, shared evidence, and asked for help. Yet she was not protected. Her death profoundly affected her family, friends, and community. A rainbow appeared in the field where she was found, an image her family keeps, alongside memories of her creative, joyful life. Her legacy endures through tributes, memorials, and continued advocacy. Her story stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of inaction. In small towns like Red Bluff, California, during the early 1980 seconds, life was slow, familiar, and safe. Or at least it seemed that way. But in March 1983, that illusion was shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. 14-year-old Rachel Ward, a girl known for her gentle heart and radiant spirit, left for school on a rainy morning and never arrived. Hours later, her body was found abandoned on a lonely dirt road outside of town, savagely murdered. For many years, the identity of her killer was unknown, casting a dark cloud over Red Bluff. But determined investigators and advancements in science eventually revealed the person responsible for the crime. Rachel Ward was born on September 6, 1968. Into a warm and caring family. She had an older sister, Andrea, whom she admired deeply. The two shared a close bond, and Andrea described her younger sister as one of the kindest and brightest people she had ever known. The family lived in Red Bluff, California, a small rural town about 200 kilometers north of Sacramento, known for its ranches, orchards, and close-knit community. In the early 1980 seconds, with a population of only about 10,000, it was the kind of place where neighbors knew one another well. By 1983, Rachel was a 14-year-old schoolgirl preparing to start high school. She was described as gentle, thoughtful, soft-spoken, with a love for animals and for helping others. Often, she spent her free time visiting nursing homes, chatting with residents and playing games with them. Volunteering gave her a sense of purpose, and she dreamed of making the world a little better through small acts of kindness. But fate had other plans. March 3, 1983. I began like any other school day. Andrea had already married and moved to Reno, so Rachel lived at home with her mother. That morning, she woke up, got ready for school, and spoke briefly with her sister on the phone before heading out. A light rain was falling, so she grabbed her umbrella and began walking toward the Seventh-day Adventist school just a few blocks away. Usually, Rachel walked with her classmate and close friend, Becky Turner. That morning, as she passed Becky's house, Rachel waited for a moment but noticed the family car was gone. Knowing that Becky's mother, a teacher at the school, often drove her children when the weather was bad, Rachel assumed Becky had already left and decided to continue walking to school alone around 8 o'clock a.m. At about 9 o'clock a.m., roughly 10 kilometers outside Red Bluff, a local farmer heard what he thought was a single gunshot. Concerned, he looked outside but saw his livestock unharmed. He also noticed a brown car driving slowly past his property, the driver seeming calm and unfamiliar. Believing it to be nothing serious, he returned to his chores. 2 hours later, around 11:30 a.m., the farmer left his house to run errands. As he walked along the dirt road, he spotted something unusual by the fence line. Moving closer, he froze in horror. The body of a young girl lay on the ground, her hands bound, a gunshot wound visible on her head. Calling out brought no response. Realizing she was dead, and recalling the gunshot he had heard earlier, the farmer ran back to his house and phoned the sheriff's office. By midday, deputies had arrived on the scene. Beginning what would become one of Red Bluff's most haunting investigations, around 3 o'clock p.m., Sandy, Rachel's mother, got home from her afternoon shift at the California Highway Patrol Station. She immediately realized Rachel wasn't there. Sandy called her older daughter, Andrea, who said she'd spoken to Rachel that morning and everything seemed normal. After that, Rachel went to school. It was strange because Rachel usually returned home around this time. Sandy grew concerned. Because mobile phones weren't common yet, Sandy couldn't contact Rachel directly. She decided to wait, hoping Rachel was just talking with a friend and had lost track of time. Turning on the television, Sandy immediately heard the news that the body of a teenage girl with a gunshot wound to the head had been found that morning. The victim had not yet been identified at the time of the report. This news only alarmed Sandy and Andrea even more. Sandy tried to call all of her daughter's friends, but only managed to reach a few. She got into her car and headed to Becky Turner's house. There, she found her daughter's best friend at home, and Becky confirmed Sandy's worst fears, saying that Rachel had not been to class that day. Horrified, Sandy immediately turned pale and went home. Now, she wanted to contact the sheriff's office to report her youngest daughter missing. At that time, law enforcement agencies were in the process of establishing the victim's identity. They immediately decided to check if the body found was Rachel. Sandy gave a detailed description of her daughter's clothes and appearance. A white blouse and blue jeans. This matched exactly the description of the victim of an unknown killer found outside the city earlier that day. Sandy was called in to identify the body. Based on her identification, the victim was confirmed to be 14-year-old Rachel Ward. The murder was a terrible blow to the family and alarmed the entire local community. The residents of Red Bluff were very scared, unsure of what to expect next. The uncertainty and increased media attention led to numerous rumors. Some were convinced that this was the work of a serial killer who would strike again if the police didn't catch him quickly. This hysteria, combined with the complex and often contradictory statements from witnesses, further worried local residents, especially school children, who feared they could be the maniac's main target. While the Ward family mourned their loss, detectives continued their investigation. Locals whispered about the motive behind Rachel's murder. Many believed she had been abused. However, at that time, it was still unknown whether Rachel had been abused or was simply the victim of random violence. Later, the sheriff held a press conference where he revealed some details of the investigation. It was confirmed that the girl had indeed been abused and then shot in the back of the head. However, they could not provide any specific information about the perpetrator. To calm the local community of parents and children, the police increased their presence in schools and patrolled the neighborhoods to make the city feel safer. Even with these measures, it took some children several years to fully recover from the trauma of this crime. Becky Turner was devastated by the death of her best friend. For several weeks, she couldn't sleep peacefully. She spoke several times with law enforcement officers who came to schools and taught children how to protect themselves and stay safe. After these instructions, Students from local schools began to go to classes in groups. The girls were especially afraid of walking alone, and Becky experienced a paralyzing fear on the road she used to take to classes with Rachel, believing that Rachel had been kidnapped on that route. In April of that year, 11 students from the Seventh-day Adventist school gathered with the parents of Rachel in the school's backyard to plant tulips in memory of her. A memorial plaque with Rachel's name was also installed there. By this time, law enforcement officers had thoroughly checked the immediate surroundings of the murder site. Detectives failed to identify any potential suspects. Rachel didn't associate with dangerous people, nor did she have any behavioral problems or addictions. She seemed like a decent teenager with no problems with her parents or reasons to run away from home. She had no known enemies or admirers. A lot of evidence was collected from Rachel's body in the crime scene, but this did not lead detectives to the perpetrator. Despite a month of hard work, the investigation was at a dead end. The case took an unexpected turn in the 1,990 seconds when Henry Lee Lucas, a notorious serial killer and prime suspect in countless other crimes, confessed to being involved in Rachel's murder. At the time, Lucas was already serving a life sentence for multiple murders and had a long, documented history of violence against women. After learning about Rachel's case, he claimed to have shot her. This wasn't unusual for Lucas. For years, he had made sweeping confessions, once boasting that he had spent 8 years traveling the highways of the United States and had killed more than 600 people. Detectives were skeptical. Lucas had a pattern of falsely claiming responsibility for high-profile crimes, seemingly in search of notoriety. In reality, he had been officially convicted of only 3 murders. His mother and 2 women. Investigators believe the vast majority of his other confessions were fabrications, with some of his supposed victims later proven to be entirely fictitious. Even so, his confession to Rachel's murder had to be taken seriously. Detectives pursued his statement and questioned him in detail. At the time of Rachel's murder, Lucas had reportedly been living near Sacramento, which, at least in theory, could have allowed him to travel to Red Bluff. However, during interrogation, he quickly revealed himself to be unreliable. He failed to recall the name of the city where the murder took place, claimed he had dumped the body somewhere near Sacramento, and gave numerous contradictory accounts. Over the course of a 3-hour interrogation, Lucas rambled, misidentified locations, and was unable to accurately describe the circumstances of the crime. This clearly shows that he lied again. Verifying Lucas's false confession consumed valuable time and resources. But in the end, investigators concluded that he had invented yet another story to feed his ego. He was eliminated as a suspect in Rachel's murder and never charged. Back in 1983, during the original investigation, law enforcement had collected DNA evidence from the crime scene, believed to belong to the killer. At the time, forensic technology was too primitive to make use of it. Years later, after Lucas's confession, detectives compared his DNA to the preserved evidence. The result was clear: there was no match. Lucas remained in prison until his death. Meanwhile, investigators continued to seek new leads. Detectives made repeated public appeals through the media, hoping to generate tips and attract potential witnesses. These efforts stirred significant attention in the local community. Several residents reported seeing a mysterious man driving a brown car in the area, someone unfamiliar in the otherwise quiet, rural farmland. Over the decades, as forensic science advanced, new suspects were considered and carefully investigated. One particularly valuable tip came from the owner of the ranch where Rachel's body had been found. He had contacted the police early on and provided a description of the driver of the brown car. Using his statement, investigators created a composite sketch. Unfortunately, the information was vague. No one had recorded the vehicle's license plate, and the driver's physical description was limited. Witnesses only recalled a stocky young man with long hair and a beard. From the evidence available, detectives were able to piece together only a rough sequence of events. After leaving her friend's house, Rachel walked a short distance toward the school. Along the road between her home and the school, she was approached by the man in the brown car. He allegedly threatened her with a gun and forced her inside. Neither the brown car nor its driver has ever been located. After the crime, investigators collected a substantial amount of physical evidence from the victim's body, including biological fluids and skin particles containing DNA. In 1983, however, DNA analysis was still in its infancy and provided no useful leads. Fortunately, the evidence was carefully documented, preserved, and stored in the police archives. Over the years, detectives pursued every possible angle, investigating men who resembled the composite sketch and scrutinizing suspicious vehicles, but no breakthrough was achieved. During this period, rumors began to circulate in Red Bluff. Some local residents noticed that the description of the mysterious brown car and its driver seemed to match Sheriff Ron Koenig, who was serving in office at the time. Whispers of suspicion spread, and despite Koenig's public proclamations of innocence, many townspeople believed he was being shielded because of his position in law enforcement. Although dozens of promising leads were investigated, no evidence ever linked him to the crime. Nonetheless, the suspicions persisted for years, casting doubt on his integrity and undermining his authority, so much so that some residents openly expressed hostility toward him. Although the investigation had reached a dead end, the case remained technically open into the 2010s. Throughout the 1992 and early 21st century, new suspects emerged, each subjected to DNA testing. Retired detectives were replaced by fresh investigators who re-examined the evidence and re-interviewed witnesses. Despite these efforts, the results were always the same: no match. With the advent of advanced DNA techniques, the original materials were repeatedly retested, compared against state and national databases, yet none yielded a breakthrough. This stalemate lasted nearly 4 decades. But in 2022, 39 years after Rochelle's murder, the case finally entered a new phase. Law enforcement began exploring the cutting-edge technique of genetic genealogy, a method that identifies perpetrators by tracing their family trees through shared DNA. By then, millions of DNA samples had been voluntarily submitted to genealogical and law enforcement databases across the United States, creating an invaluable resource. Even if a suspect's DNA wasn't in the system, investigators could now locate relatives and build family connections to narrow down potential matches. While the process was often time-consuming, taking weeks or months, it had already revolutionized cold case investigations. With over 600 cases solved through genetic genealogy in 2023 alone, that same year, a dedicated team of detectives was assembled to re-examine unsolved crimes, and Rochelle's case was selected. In their review, they uncovered a key piece of overlooked evidence: a small tuft of hair recovered from the victim's body in 1983 that did not belong to her. Investigators believed it most likely came from her abuser and killer. Their plan was to extract DNA from the hair and use genealogical methods to trace the perpetrator's family tree. The Tehama County Sheriff's Office consulted with the FBI and the California Department of Justice, both of which had been involved in the original investigation. Together, they agreed to move forward with the new approach. The hair sample was sent to Astria Forensics, a laboratory specializing in degraded DNA recovery. Once a viable profile was developed, it was forwarded to the FBI for genealogical research. Unlike most cases, which often dragged on for months, progress came quickly. On September 7, 2023, detectives convened with Justice Department and FBI officials to review the findings. The genealogical analysis pointed toward a prime suspect, Johnny Coy, a former resident of Red Bluff. Coy's background immediately raised red flags. He had a long history of violent crimes against women, including one strikingly similar to the abduction, abuse, and murder of Rochelle. Despite this disturbing history, he had never been seriously considered a suspect in her case. Even well into his 80s, Coy remained known to police for petty crime, substance abuse, and violent outbursts. 6 years after Rochelle's death, in 1989, Coy stopped a car containing a woman and her 21-year-old daughter, who recognized him as a local resident. He forced them to drive to a deserted road, where he abused the daughter at gunpoint, stole their belongings and car, and abandoned them. The victims contacted law enforcement, and Coy was quickly apprehended while still armed and in possession of stolen items and illegal substances. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 life sentences. Detectives hoped to obtain a confession from Coy regarding Rachel's murder. However, he had died in prison in June 2019, never facing justice for her death. Therefore, it became essential to prove his involvement by identifying his relatives and comparing their DNA to the evidence from the crime scene. Coy's family members were readily located in the area. After a detailed explanation, several agreed to voluntarily provide DNA samples, despite the potential for public scrutiny, with the promise of anonymity. While DNA matching in such cases is not always 100% conclusive, obtaining multiple samples significantly increased the accuracy of the analysis. Each DNA profile tested showed a significant match to the Johnny Coy family. Moreover, his appearance aligned with the witness's description of the perpetrator. Additionally, Johnny owned a brown car during those years. It remained unclear why checks in the registered databases had not yielded a match previously, especially considering Johnny was already incarcerated and his profile should have been in the database. The California Department of Justice even conducted an investigation into this discrepancy. The investigation revealed that Johnny's DNA sample was collected early in the development of DNA analysis techniques. Consequently, the combined DNA index system used by the FBI had outdated markers loaded in, markers which were only used for a limited time during the database's initial formation and were non-functional by 2020. Several decades had passed since the murder. Now, there was no doubt about Johnny Coy's involvement in the murder of Rachel. Johnny's profile, long uploaded to the database, was recompared with the markers collected from the strand of hair, and a thorough analysis confirmed a match. On October 3, 2023, the investigation of the case was completed. According to official commentary, had Johnny been alive when the DNA tests were conducted, the evidence would have been sufficient to charge him with Johnny's abuse and murder and secure a conviction at trial. Even with the best lawyers, his chances of avoiding punishment would have been minimal. The successful resolution of the Rachel Ward murder case, despite the passage of time, had a significant impact on everyone affected by Johnny Coy's actions. First, all suspicion against Sheriff Ron Koenig was eliminated, bringing relief to his family. Although he had passed away from natural causes in 2009, his name was finally cleared of any suspicion. Secondly, Rachel's loved ones were also relieved to finally know who was responsible for their daughter's murder. However, despite this discovery, Rachel's family is still not satisfied, as they want the killer to stand trial and receive the punishment he deserves. Furthermore, they would never learn all the details of what happened, details that Johnny took with him to the grave. The case was closed. Andrea, Rachel's older sister, spoke to journalists, expressing her sorrow and recounting her close relationship with Rachel. At the time of the murder, Andrea was pregnant, although she was not yet aware of it. Rachel had always been deeply interested in this topic. Her sister constantly asked her if she was pregnant. Rachel wanted her sister to have a baby so badly. Andrea was deeply saddened that Rachel did not live to see the birth of her niece, whom she named in honor of her deceased sister. Rachel was the kindest and brightest person in the world to Andrea. Now, Andrea said she felt mixed emotions. On one hand, after 40 long years, she finally knew who was guilty of her sister's murder. On the other hand, she wished she could personally confront the criminal and tell him about the suffering he inflicted on everyone who loved and was close to his victim. The detectives focused on more routine aspects of the investigation. Specifically, they were investigating whether Johnny Coy committed other violent crimes during the 6 years between Rachel's murder and the kidnapping of the woman and her daughter. While he could have committed several crimes during that time, only forensic evidence can confirm this, and no new evidence or DNA matches have been found yet. When Stacy, 32, collapsed suddenly in her home, her friends and family were stunned. Doctors quickly attributed the cause to a history of heart disease, Her death was ruled a tragic medical complication. But behind that seemingly plausible explanation were a host of unanswered questions. Why had her symptoms come on so suddenly? For years, the truth was shrouded in a veil of natural causes. But then quiet suspicions grew, forcing investigators to dig deeper. And what they found was not only shocking, but also revealed a macabre plot, a murder weapon, disguised in the most innocuous of ways. The morning of September 23, 2018, seemed like any other in a quiet suburban home on the outskirts of Mount Holly, North Carolina. Two young girls were playing nearby while their mother, 32-year-old Stacy Hunsucker, rested in the living room. Everything was calm until her husband, Joshua Lee Hunsucker, suddenly noticed something was terribly wrong. Stacy wasn't responding, and she wasn't breathing. According to Joshua, he immediately called emergency services. First responders arrived to find Stacy lying on the couch. Her skin had turned bluish. Her body temperature was dangerously low, and no heartbeat could be detected. Despite urgent life-saving efforts, she had already passed away. Stacy was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, her sudden death didn't immediately raise suspicion. Medical professionals knew Stacy had a history of heart problems. She had a pacemaker and had experienced troubling symptoms in the past. On the surface, it seemed like a tragic but not unusual case for someone with a serious cardiac condition. But something felt off. It wasn't just the suddenness of her death, it was Joshua's reaction. He firmly refused an autopsy, claiming Stacy would never have wanted any invasive procedures. He delivered his stance without hesitation. With no obvious signs of foul play and no legal grounds to override him, investigators and medical staff accepted his decision. No autopsy was performed. By the next day, Joshua had already arranged for cremation. Stacy's family, especially her mother, Susie Robinson, was stunned by how quickly everything was moving. Official paperwork hadn't even been finalized, yet the body was already at a funeral home. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. Joshua kept his involvement minimal and did not help with funeral arrangements. Susie couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Despite Stacy's medical history, she had seemed vibrant and energetic just the day before. The speed and secrecy surrounding his final arrangements only fueled Susie's unease. She didn't yet know where to begin, but deep down, she felt something wasn't right. Joshua Lee Hunsucker grew up in Stanley, North Carolina. He came from what appeared to be a stable family and led an unremarkable early life. He attended East Gaston High School in Mount Holly, where he met Stacy Robinson. Their relationship began in their teenage years and continued steadily into adulthood. Stacy was born on May 7, 1986, in Mecklenburg County. From a young age, she was deeply involved in her local Methodist church in Mount Holly, where she took part in community programs and volunteered at the Young Men's Christian Association, leading youth activities and supporting summer programs. On May 1, 2010, Joshua and Stacy were married. In February 2013, they welcomed their first daughter, Piper Elizabeth. That same year, Stacy's health issues became more serious. She was diagnosed with a cardiac condition that required a pacemaker. Despite this, the Hunsucker family carried on with life as normally as possible. In the fall of 2014, Stacy gave birth to their second daughter, Willow Darlene. Soon after, her health worsened. That November, she was rushed to the hospital with an alarmingly low heart rate and blood pressure. She was placed in intensive care. 2 months later, she suffered another medical crisis, a cardiac arrest that required mechanical ventilation. Doctors were never able to determine the exact cause of her decline. Around this time, Joshua began working for Atrium Health as a paramedic on a medical helicopter team, providing the family with steady income. They bought a spacious 3-bedroom home in the Catawba Heights neighborhood of Mount Holly, perfect for their growing family. Stacy devoted herself to raising her daughters, crafting handmade items, and capturing every precious moment in photographs. Despite her fragile health, she remained active and deeply committed to her family. In 2015, A family friend launched a GoFundMe campaign to help cover Stacy's mounting medical expenses. The page described in detail the complications she had endured after her first pregnancy. From the outside, everything appeared stable. 2 daughters, a steady job for Joshua, a new home, and strong community ties. But behind that image, Stacy's health remained fragile. She relied on her pacemaker and continued treatment, though those around her often remarked on how normal she seemed. Stacy never appeared anxious or defeated by her condition. Instead, she poured her energy into caring for her family and managing everyday life. After Stacy's death, her mother, Susie, discovered something deeply troubling. Stacy had been a registered organ donor, yet the donation process was never carried out. No one could explain why the medical organization responsible for donor coordination failed to follow through. Joshua insisted he was honoring Stacy's wishes, but he never provided any documentation to support his claim. The entire burden of arranging the funeral fell on the Robinson family. Susie and her husband, John, managed every detail, from selecting the urn to publishing the obituary. Without Joshua's help, during this time, Joshua showed little sign of profound grief. What shocked the family even more was what happened just weeks later. Another woman moved into the house. Joshua was suddenly living openly with someone new, who quickly became a visible presence in the same home where Stacy had lived. The speed of it all was staggering. There were no conversations, no explanations offered to Robinson family, and no thought given to how Piper and Willow might process such an abrupt change. The Robinsons couldn't ignore how quickly Joshua seemed to move on. He never sought counseling, nor did he ask for guidance on how to help his daughters cope with the loss of their mother. Every decision was made unilaterally, without involving Robinson family or considering their perspective. To Susie, Joshua's behavior felt disturbingly out of place. She knew that grief manifests differently for everyone, but what she witnessed didn't resemble grief at all. She wasn't the only one who felt uneasy. Friends of the family, aware of growing tension between Stacy and Joshua in the weeks before her death, also began to question his actions. Neighbors recalled hearing arguments, the sudden shift in his life, from widower to moving in a new partner, seemed impossible to reconcile with genuine mourning. As unease grew, difficult questions began to surface. Was Stacy's death really natural, or was something being overlooked? Eventually, Susie took her concerns to local authorities. She shared everything she had observed and formally requested an investigation. She wasn't trying to assign blame. She simply needed clarity. That request would become the turning point in the case. Investigators immediately faced a major obstacle. Stacy had already been cremated. Without her body, a post-mortem exam was impossible. But one overlooked procedural detail would prove crucial. Under state protocol, when a registered organ donor passes away, medical facilities are required to collect and preserve biological samples, even if the donation itself is not completed. In Stacy's case, blood samples taken immediately after her death had been stored by LifeShare Donor Center, the organization overseeing organ donation in the state. Normally, such samples aren't subject to further testing, but after Susie's formal request and the launch of a criminal investigation, authorities were granted access to them. These samples represented the only remaining chance for forensic analysis. When they were finally delivered to the lab, expectations were modest. Stacy's official cause of death was listed as heart failure, and few investigators believed the results would reveal anything unexpected. When toxicology testing was finally performed, the results sent shockwaves through the investigation. The analysis revealed the presence of tetrahydrozoline in Stacy's bloodstream, and not just trace amounts. The concentration was lethal, measuring 30 to 40 times higher than what could ever be considered safe. Tetrahydrozoline is the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops, such as Visine, typically used to reduce redness by constricting blood vessels in the eyes. Under normal use, it barely enters the bloodstream. Even if accidentally swallowed, the effects in adults are usually mild. But in Stacy's case, the staggering level in her system ruled out any possibility of accidental ingestion. This was not a few drops. This was a deliberate, massive At such concentrations, tetrahydrozoline doesn't just soothe irritated eyes, it acts as a deadly poison. It slows the heart to a crawl, drops blood pressure to fatal lows, suppresses breathing, and induces unconsciousness. It is a silent killer, leaving few external signs, and that is exactly what happened to Stacy. This discovery shifted the case from a presumed medical tragedy to a calculated act of poisoning. What made it even more chilling was the nature of the substance itself. Tetrahydrozoline is not a common poison. It is virtually tasteless, and when diluted, can be passed into food or drink undetected. Investigators concluded that whoever administered it chose it precisely because it was obscure, accessible, and difficult to detect. Attention quickly turned to Joshua Hunsucker. As a trained paramedic, he possessed the medical knowledge to understand exactly how such a compound worked and how to exploit it. Motive soon came into focus: financial gain. Records revealed that Joshua was the sole beneficiary of 2 life insurance policies in Stacy's name, one worth $80,000 and another worth $150,000. Just days after her death, before the grief had even settled, Joshua filed his claims and collected $250,000 in payouts. Investigators uncovered that prior to Stacy's death, Joshua's finances were strained. His paramedic salary barely covered household expenses, and medical bills had left him in debt. But within weeks of receiving the insurance money, he paid off debts, purchased new appliances, began home renovations, and indulged in luxuries completely out of step with his former lifestyle. Joshua's behavior the day Stacy died also raised serious doubts. His accounts of what happened shifted depending on the audience. To emergency responders, he said he found her unresponsive on the couch. Later, he claimed he had attempted CPR but failed. To Stacy's family, he told a different story, that she had simply drifted off to sleep and never woke up. To friends, yet another version, that she had been dizzy and weak earlier in the day. The contradictions were glaring. His phone was off. There were no surveillance cameras, and the timeline of Stacy's final hours remained deliberately murky. The most chilling revelation came from Joshua's own colleagues. Several paramedics recalled disturbing remarks he had made in the months before Stacy's death. In casual conversation about unusual poisoning cases, Joshua allegedly joked that someone could kill a person by slipping eye drops into their drink. At the time, it seemed like a tasteless attempt at humor. But after Stacy's death, those comments resurfaced with horrifying clarity. Co-workers came forward to confirm his fascination with pharmacology and his detailed knowledge of how chemicals like tetrahydrozoline affected the body. Investigators cross-referenced those comments with evidence found at the home, specifically, a bottle of eye drops discovered in a kitchen drawer, far from any medicine cabinet. The placement alone raised suspicions. Stacy had no history of eye problems, and neither of the girls used the product. To detectives, the half-empty bottle wasn't just an oversight. It looked like a smoking gun, its missing contents aligning almost exactly with the toxic levels later discovered in Stacy's bloodstream. By December 2019, 15 months after Stacy's sudden death, the case had gathered enough momentum for authorities to act. Joshua Lee Hunsucker was arrested in Gaston County on a charge of first-degree murder. The news tore through Mount Holly, leaving neighbors in disbelief. The man, once seen as a life-saving paramedic, a familiar face at emergencies, was now accused of weaponizing his medical knowledge against his own wife. Joshua spent only days in detention before securing release on a $1.5 million bond, reportedly with help from outside financial backers. The courts quickly froze his access to the $230,000 life insurance payout, preserving the Robinson family's right to pursue civil recovery. Prosecutors also filed insurance fraud charges, noting that Joshua had signed sworn declarations stating no suspicious circumstances surrounded Stacy's death, a statement investigators now believed was intentionally false. Meanwhile, Stacy's parent, Susie and John Robinson, turned to the courts themselves. They sought custody of their granddaughters, arguing that Joshua, now charged with their mother's murder, could no longer provide a safe home. The request set the stage for a bitter custody fight, with the children's future hanging in limbo. While the criminal case played out, Joshua, under increasing pressure, assembled a legal defense. His attorneys dismissed the state's case as circumstantial, arguing that the toxicology report alone could not prove intent. They painted the prosecution's narrative as speculative, built on coincidence and gossip. But as proceedings continued, more voices came forward. Joshua's colleagues, acquaintances, and even neighbors. Some recalled his grim jokes about poisoning with eye drops. Others described a marriage marked by tension, financial stress, and Joshua's growing dissatisfaction. The once pristine image of a dedicated family man began to fracture. Then, as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing new incident, an episode that seemed to show Joshua's recklessness extended well beyond his own household. In early November 2019, while still under investigation for Stacy's death, Joshua was on duty as a flight paramedic aboard an Atrium Health medevac helicopter. During a mission, a fire erupted in the tail section, forcing the pilot into an emergency landing. Miraculously, no lives were lost, but the helicopter suffered serious damage. When investigators examined the wreckage, they found traces of flammable liquid in places it did not belong. Alongside clear signs of tampering, security cameras provided a chilling piece of evidence. Joshua had been seen near the aircraft just before takeoff off shift, and alone. For investigators, the incident painted a picture of a man spiraling out of control, willing to gamble with innocent lives, even as the noose of suspicion tightened around him. Law enforcement and the Federal Aviation Administration officials pressed Joshua about the helicopter fire. He insisted he had simply been checking equipment, but Atrium Health's internal logs proved otherwise. The inspection that morning was assigned to another staff member. Joshua had no clearance, no official reason, and no explanation for being near the aircraft. His presence became more damning when investigators unearthed a new lead, a receipt from a local gas station. Using his own debit card, Joshua had purchased an aerosol can containing highly flammable chemicals just days before the incident. Laboratory testing confirmed that the same chemical signature was embedded in the scorched panels of the helicopter. For investigators, this wasn't negligence. It was sabotage. Theories of motive ranged from calculated distraction to psychological breakdown. Mental health experts speculated he might have been unraveling under the weight of looming murder charges, lashing out in reckless, self-destructive ways, but prosecutors saw it differently. This was not a cry for help. It was deliberate endangerment. The official charge reflected the gravity, intentional damage to an aircraft, with potential risk to human life. The case already painted Joshua as manipulative, but the helicopter fire introduced something darker: volatility. A man accused of poisoning his wife was now linked to an act of public sabotage, reinforcing the image of someone spiraling out of control and willing to gamble with the lives of strangers. Then came February 2023, and Joshua's most audacious lie yet. On the night of the 21st of February, he phoned police with a frantic story. He had been kidnapped. He claimed that while taking out the trash, a car pulled up. A masked man brandished a weapon, and he was shoved into the trunk. He said, hours later, he was dumped back near his home. Incredibly, he pointed a finger at John Robinson, Stacy's father, as the possible mastermind. The allegation was explosive. When police reviewed surveillance footage from surrounding homes, the narrative collapsed. Cameras showed no suspicious vehicles, no confrontation. In reality, Joshua was seen stepping outside alone, circling the block briefly, and then re-entering his home through the back door only 30 minutes later. GPS data from his phone confirmed he had never left the area. The kidnapping was a fabrication, another manipulation designed to smear the Robinson family and sway the custody dispute over his daughters. This time, however, his scheme backfired immediately. Police charged him with filing a false report and attempting to obstruct justice. For John Robinson, the ordeal was devastating. Even though his name was formally cleared, being listed, however briefly, in an official police report as a suspect in a crime, he never committed reopened wounds of grief and humiliation. The authorities issued a written apology and struck his name from the record, yet the damage lingered. A cruel reminder of how far Joshua was willing to go, poisoning his wife, endangering lives in the air, and even framing an innocent father, all in a desperate attempt to evade accountability. To prosecutors, the staged abduction was the final puzzle piece. It proved Joshua wasn't just guilty. He was calculating, remorseless, and dangerous. A man capable of twisting truth itself into a weapon. In the spring of 2023, the case took an even darker turn. Piper, the 10-year-old daughter of Stacy, was temporarily under the Robinsons' care when she suddenly began suffering from alarming symptoms: fatigue, dizziness, weakness, dangerously low blood pressure, and a slowing heartbeat. At first, doctors suspected a viral illness, but given the family history, they ordered toxicology tests. The results were chilling. Piper's blood contained traces of tetrahydroethylene, the same compound that had killed her mother. The dose was smaller, not immediately lethal, but still far above safe limits. Medical experts concluded the exposure was not accidental, it was deliberate. They warned that if the exposure continued or had been slightly higher, the outcome could have been fatal. Investigators immediately turned to Piper's environment. The Robinsons swore there were no such eye drops in their home, and doctors confirmed Piper had never needed or been prescribed them. A search of Joshua's residence revealed a smoking gun, a fresh bottle of eye drops laced with tetrahydroethylene, and an empty blister pack of medication designed to intensify toxicity. The timeline sealed the suspicion. Days before Piper's collapse, Joshua had been granted unsupervised visitation. Within 24 hours of her returning home, she was in distress. Prosecutors theorized Joshua had poisoned his daughter not to kill her, but to frame the Robinsons, knowing that if Piper's health failed under their care, it could cast doubt on their fitness as guardians and potentially restore his access. The dosage was calculated, just enough to sicken her. This revelation was viewed as a turning point. Prosecutors amended the charges to include attempted harm to a minor with intent. In an emergency ruling, the court stripped Joshua of all visitation and contact rights, placing full custody of Piper and her sister permanently with the Robinsons. The family was also granted grounds for a civil lawsuit, accusing Joshua of endangering his own child as part of a manipulative scheme, but Joshua's malice did not end there. By mid-2024, his behavior spiraled into outright terror campaigns against Stacy's parents. Susie and John Robinson began noticing signs of surveillance. Unmarked envelopes containing family photographs, candid shots of their home, even a note that read chillingly, "I see everything. I'm close." The harassment escalated. Packages arrived with grotesque contents: children's toys, a small box of girls' clothes, and once, a container of food labeled, "For the memories." Postal investigators later traced the shipments to lockers rented under false identities. John installed cameras around their property. One night, footage captured a hooded figure, Joshua's build unmistakable, pausing outside the Robinson home, raising a phone as if recording. That evidence was enough. The Robinsons filed a formal complaint, citing stalking and threats. Prosecutors argued Joshua had flagrantly violated existing no-contact orders. The court agreed. A new arrest warrant was issued, painting a portrait of a man who had moved beyond poisoning and manipulation into obsessive, calculated psychological warfare against the very people trying to protect his children. In August 2024, Joshua Hunsucker was arrested once again. This time, investigators uncovered chilling evidence inside his home: packing supplies, empty envelopes, printed photographs, and a laptop filled with drafted messages aimed directly at the Robinson family. Even more disturbing was a detailed map, marked with addresses, routes, and surveillance points. It painted the picture of a man who wasn't just watching, but plotting. When confronted, Joshua tried to downplay the discovery. He insisted he was only gathering evidence and claimed he had every right to document events for his own protection. But the sheer scope of what investigators found told a different story, one of intimidation and manipulation. With that, His arrest was extended, and this time there would be no bail. This incident proved to be a turning point in the case. It showed prosecutors that Joshua wasn't simply trying to defend himself within the law. He was actively interfering with justice, targeting the very people who sought accountability for his wife's death. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Toxicology and forensic reports, witness testimony, surveillance footage, hundreds of pages of documentation, and a carefully constructed timeline tracing back to 2018. Prosecutors presented the court with a clear, methodical narrative of the series of actions Joshua had taken. Susie and John never missed a single session. Their presence was a reminder that this case was never just about evidence on paper. It was about a life stolen and 2 children forever scarred. The prosecution hammered this point home, arguing that Joshua wasn't only guilty of a crime years ago, but had proven himself to be dangerous over and over again. He is a dangerous and calculating individual, incapable of remorse. However, to date, Joshua's case is still in the pretrial stage, with no final trial or verdict yet. A separate decision from family court permanently granted full custody of the daughters to the Robinson family. The girls received new documentation with their father's last name legally removed. They were provided with psychological support and approved to transfer to a different school and relocate. The story of Stacy is not only a tale of one family's unimaginable loss, but also a chilling reminder of how trust can be betrayed in the most intimate spaces. What began as a tragedy explained away by fragile health unraveled into a saga of deceit, sabotage, and cruelty. Though Joshua has yet to face a final verdict in criminal court, the evidence amassed against him paints the picture of a man who chose manipulation and destruction over love and responsibility. For Susie and John Robinson, the fight has never been about revenge. It has been about truth, justice, and protecting the 2 young girls left behind. Today, Piper and Willow are safe in the care of their grandparents, growing up in a home built on love rather than fear. The path ahead is long, but Stacy's legacy endures in them,